100 dinners written down in ink, and most of them never made it past the family that owned the notebook. Stewed oxtails over rice, smothered rabbit with onion gravy, pepper pot thick enough to hold a spoon upright. These were not restaurant dishes. They lived in spiral-bound cookbooks held together with rubber bands, in church recipe collections printed on a mimeograph machine, in index cards tucked inside a Bible. Number 14 on this list fed a family of 8 on less than $2. Number 41 disappeared when the last woman who made it stopped writing things down. And number 78 calls for a cut of meat the butcher counter has not carried in 30 years. Every one of these dinners came out of a black kitchen where the cookbook was not decoration. It was a record of survival. Hit subscribe because this list runs deep. Here are 100 forgotten dinners you could only find in old black cookbooks. Number 17, fried bologna and biscuit sandwich, a round of red rind bologna on the butcher counter in 1944 Pittsburgh, 20 cents a pound. The War Ration Board rewrote the rules every other Tuesday. She cut 4 thick slices, scored each one with an X to keep it from puffing, laid them in a hot iron skillet with a teaspoon of bacon grease. The edges curled into little cups that held the grease. The centers turned the color of a warm brick. The biscuits were buttermilk, baked that morning in the same skillet. She split them, laid the fried slice on the bottom half, pressed the top down so the grease soaked through. A coal miner ate 2 for breakfast and a third in his lunch pail wrapped in waxed paper. That was breakfast. The sandwich cost 5 cents in 1944. Your grandfather carried one like it into the coal seam every morning. It was the shift food of every miner from Pittsburgh to Beckley. The dish disappeared by 1980 when the bologna lost its red rind. Number 17, chitlins. The preparation took all day. You cleaned the pig intestines by hand, turning them inside out, scraping them, rinsing 7 or 8 times until the water ran clear. The smell was so strong that neighbors knew what you were making from 2 houses away. Then you boiled them for 4 or 5 hours with onions and vinegar until they turned tender. A 10-pound bucket of chitlins cost about $1 in the 1950s and fed a family of 8 for 2 days. The tradition went back to slavery, when enslaved people received the parts of the hog that white families did not want. The intestines, the feet, the tail, the snout. They turned scraps into meals through patience and skill that no cookbook could teach. By the 1950s, chitlins were served at holiday gatherings and church suppers across the South, a celebration dish born from scarcity's grip. That transformation is the whole story of soul food. Number 15, candied yams without marshmallows. The original candied yams had no marshmallows anywhere near them. They were cooked on the stove top in a cast iron skillet. Sweet potatoes sliced thick, slow cooked in butter, brown sugar, nutmeg, cinnamon, and vanilla until they caramelized into a glossy, sticky glaze. The marshmallows came from a corporation. In 1917, Janet Mackenzie Hill, founder of the Boston Cooking School magazine, created the marshmallow-topped sweet potato casserole for the Angelus Marshmallow Company. A marketing campaign permanently altered a black culinary tradition. By the 1950s, 75% of sweet potato casserole recipes in mainstream cookbooks included marshmallows. The stovetop skillet version, the original, has largely disappeared from your table. But here is what the marshmallows buried. Enslaved people recognized the sweet potato as a cousin of the yam from home. 3,000 miles from West Africa, this one vegetable carried memory. After emancipation, sweet potatoes were one of the few crops formerly enslaved people could grow on small plots of land. The yam was independence. The marshmallow was a corporate intrusion nobody asked for.
Chicken quarters baked instead of turkey gave families affordable poultry that still felt special. allowing black mothers to serve bird on Thanksgiving without spending $20 on turkey. Leg quarters sold for less than 50 cents per pound in the 1970s, and when bought in bulk bags, they became even more economical. Mothers seasoned them heavily with paprika, garlic powder, black pepper, and whatever herbs the cabinet held, then baked them slowly until the skin crisped golden and the meat stayed tender. The dark meat remained moist even with extended cooking, making them more forgiving than turkey breast. A 10-pound bag of chicken quarters could feed 20 people when accompanied by generous sides. The drippings collected in baking pans became bases for gravy, ensuring nothing went to waste. Children actually preferred chicken to turkey because it was familiar and easier to eat. Baked chicken quarters taught families that tradition could be adapted.
Number 17, fried chicken livers. When a chicken was dressed for Sunday, the livers were never thrown out because they made a supper all their own. These little dark morsels came nearly free, the part most folks today never think to cook. The cook would rinse them, roll them in seasoned flour, and slide them into hot grease where they spit and crackled and crisped up fast. The outside turned crunchy and brown while the inside stayed soft and rich. A few minutes was all they needed, and a small bowl of them went a long way. Some families served them over rice with a spoon of pan gravy. Others piled them onto a plate with hot sauce and ate them with their fingers straight from the skillet. Cheap, quick, and deeply savory, fried chicken livers turned a handful of giblets into a real meal, a reminder that nothing on the bird ever went to waste. Number 14, butter beans with ham hock. A smoked ham hock went into a deep pot with dried butter beans that had soaked overnight in cold water. The pot was filled, covered, and set on a low flame that would not be touched for 3 hours. The ham hock did all the work. As it cooked, the smoke and salt leached out of the bone and into the liquid, and the fat under the skin melted into the broth and gave it a sheen that no seasoning could replicate. The beans swelled slowly, absorbing that smoky water until each one was creamy inside and heavy with flavor. By the time the pot was ready, the ham hock had given everything it had. The meat around the bone was pulled off in shreds and stirred back into the beans. The bone itself, stripped clean, was sometimes left in the pot on the table as proof of what had flavored the meal. The broth had reduced into something thick enough to hold a spoon upright, and the beans sat in it like small pillows, each one soft enough to crush against the roof of the mouth. Butter beans and a ham hock fed a family for less than $1 in the years when $1 still meant something. The dish showed up on Sunday tables across the Black South, not because anyone chose it from a list of options, but because it was what the pantry allowed. A bag of dried beans lasted months. A ham hock cost almost nothing. Together, they made a meal that filled every bowl on the table and left enough in the pot for Monday. When smoked ham hocks grew scarce at the grocery counter and dried beans lost ground to canned alternatives, the long Sunday pot of butter beans became something people remembered eating rather than something they still made. There is a reason most of these dinners involve pork. It was not preference, it was economics. After emancipation, Black families in the South had access to the parts of the hog that plantation owners did not want: the feet, the tail, the ears, the stomach, the jowl, the backbone. These were handed down, sold cheap, or left behind. A whole tradition of slow cooking grew out of necessity. These cuts were tough, unfamiliar to most American palates, and required hours of heat to become edible. The women who figured out how to turn them into Sunday dinner were solving a problem that nobody else was willing to acknowledge existed. They were feeding families on what the market called waste, and they made it taste better than what the market called premium. Number 14, neck bones and corn. There were two versions of this dinner, and which one showed up depended on the calendar. In the summer, when fresh corn came off the stalk in the early morning before the sugar turned to starch, whole ears went straight into the pot alongside neck bones that had been building flavor since noon. The cobs released a natural sweetness into the broth that balanced the salt and smoke of the pork. You ate the corn off the cob with your hands, then drank the broth from the bowl. In the winter, families reached for dried corn that had been shelled and stored in cloth sacks or canned corn from the pantry shelf. Dried corn needed an overnight soak before it was any use in a pot, and it never matched the sweetness of fresh, but it gave the broth a starchy weight that fresh corn could not. The winter version came out thicker, heavier, closer to a stew. The summer version ran lighter, almost celebratory, the kind of meal families looked forward to when the first ears appeared. What set this dinner apart was not the cooking, it was geography. Corn grew in almost every county in the South, good soil or poor, flat ground or hilly. You did not need a productive garden to grow corn. You needed a patch of dirt and enough rain. That meant every family, regardless of how little land they had access to, could put corn and neck bones on the table at least part of the year. It was the most widely available meal in the rural Southern kitchen, and it carried the taste of summer even when it came from a jar in the middle of January. The families who grew their own corn picked it at dawn before the heat changed the flavor and cooked it the same day. That freshness was the line between a decent pot and one people remembered 30 years later. Here is the part that nobody in the food industry talks about. The cuts that poor Black families survived on for generations. The neck bones and oxtails and pig feet are now expensive. What used to be the cheapest thing in the meat case, the parts nobody else wanted, started showing up on restaurant menus with new names and high prices. Chefs in Brooklyn and Austin and Portland discovered what grandmothers in Mississippi had known since the 1800s, that low and slow turns a cheap bone into something extraordinary. The prices followed. Today, neck bones can cost several dollars a pound in many grocery stores. Oxtails, which used to be given away, now sit among the most expensive cuts in the case. The families who built their survival around these cuts are being priced out of their own food tradition. That is not nostalgia, that is economics. And it explains why so many of these dinners are disappearing from the tables where they were invented.
Macaroni and stewed tomatoes was a surprisingly tangy, humble dish that stretched every ingredient just a little further, making it a popular staple in the 1960s kitchen. Elbow macaroni boiled until tender was mixed with tomatoes stewed down until they turned soft and slightly sweet, creating a flavor that was simple yet strangely satisfying. It did not pretend to be anything fancy. It was a dish for busy parents, hungry kids, and anyone needing comfort without cost. The tang from the tomatoes mixed with the soft macaroni in a way that stuck in your memory long after childhood passed. Some families topped it with a bit of cheese, some kept it plain, but either way, it tasted warm and familiar, like a weeknight that ended well. It was a dish defined not by extravagance but by reliability, something people still crave because it feels like stepping back into a kitchen where everything was steady and safe. Fried saubali with molasses was a dinner that blended savory and sweet in a way that still lingers in memory. Saubali, or pork belly, was inexpensive and high in fat, making it a common ingredient for working families. Sliced and fried crisp in a skillet, it was then drizzled with molasses, turning it into a dish that balanced salt, fat, and sweetness. Served with cornbread or potatoes, it made a plate that was both filling and deeply flavorful. Families loved it because it elevated a humble cut into something special, a small indulgence during hard years. The molasses gave the pork a sticky, caramelized coating that made the dish memorable for children and adults alike. though it disappeared as leaner cuts became more common. Fried sow belly with molasses once represented creativity and comfort. It proved that even the simplest, cheapest ingredients could create meals that felt indulgent and satisfying in every bite. Watermelon rind hash was a dish that proved nothing in a Southern kitchen ever truly went to waste. After the sweet red fruit was eaten down to its pale skin, the green rinds were peeled, diced, and saved for the next meal. They were boiled until soft, then tossed into a skillet with onions, peppers, and a pinch of spice. What came out of that pan was golden and glistening, sweet with a hint of salt, smelling faintly of summer rain and backyard laughter. The rind soaked up flavor like memory itself, turning something forgotten into something worth savoring. Families served it with cornbread or rice, sometimes even cold the next morning with eggs. It filled bellies when money was short and reminded everyone that resourcefulness could taste as good as plenty. The sizzle in the skillet sounded like hope, sharp and quick, the sign that something good was about to happen. Watermelon rind hash was not just food, it was gratitude on a plate. Every bite told the story of people who refused to waste even the smallest blessing. It was sweet, it was humble, and it carried the quiet genius of survival, transforming scraps into a celebration that no one ever forgot. Scrapple was the kind of thing you either grew up on or would never understand. It was a loaf made of pork scraps, cornmeal, and seasoning, formed into a block, chilled overnight, then sliced and fried thick in a pan. The result was something between a meatloaf and a fried cake, with crispy edges and a soft, savory middle. The gravy was simple. You took the drippings left in the pan, added some flour and water, and stirred until it bubbled. That was poured straight over the scrapple like syrup on pancakes. There was no polite way to eat it. You cut it, scooped it, and sopped it up with whatever you had. It was greasy, dense, and completely satisfying. Scrapple came from people who knew that meat did not end with the tender cuts. It was a poor man's roast, made with brains, hearts, or necks, if that was all you had. But no one dared call it second-rate. It was breakfast, lunch, or dinner depending on the day. And when the weather was cruel and the wood was wet, scrapple and gravy reminded you that with a little time and grease, even scraps could become something worth waiting for. Barbecue pigtails were the taste of summer, the kind of meal you could smell long before you saw it. They sizzled on the grill, fat rendering into fire, smoke curling into the sky like prayer. The sauce was always homemade, sweet, tangy, and thick enough to stick to your fingers. Every family had their own version, a secret recipe passed down in whispers and stained aprons. Pigtails were humble, but they were celebration food, eaten standing up under the sun with paper plates and laughter. Children waited for the crackle to die down, for the sauce to caramelize just enough to bite. They were chewy, sticky, and rich with flavor that only came from patience and love. Barbecue pigtails told stories of resourcefulness, of turning what others overlooked into something glorious. They tasted like togetherness, like backyard gatherings where music mixed with smoke and every bite felt like memory. Fried rice with scrambled egg was the kind of supper that could be made out of almost nothing but still managed to feel hearty. Leftover rice was saved from the night before, reheated in a skillet with a little oil or lard, and then combined with scrambled egg to add richness. My grandmother would sometimes add chopped onion or green pepper if the garden allowed, but the dish stood strong even without extras. The rice fried up golden, the egg binding it together into something more than scraps. A dash of salt and pepper finished it, though hot sauce often appeared at the table too. What amazed me was how it transformed simple grains into a filling plate that stretched across a family without breaking the budget. The meal carried warmth and thrift in equal measure, reminding everyone that dinner did not need meat to be satisfying. In the 1960s, fried rice with scrambled egg was not fancy, but it was dependable, the kind of dish that fed children and adults alike with just enough to keep spirits steady.
Number 20, stewed turnip greens with pot liquor bread. A galvanized washtub of greens on the kitchen floor in 1946 Atlanta. Two pecks pulled that morning from the back lot. She stripped the leaves from the stems with her thumbs, tore them into ribbons, dropped them into a cast iron pot with a smoked ham hock and a quart of water. The greens cooked down for 3 hours, dark as wet leather. The pot liquor ran the color of strong tea. The pot liquor was the prize. She tore corn pone into a tin bowl, ladled the green broth over it, called the children for supper. Each portion cost 4 cents. The doctor in 1956 told her the broth carried more iron than the steak he couldn't afford to recommend. Your grandmother already knew. She had been cooking it that way for decades. By 1989, the smoked ham hock was a specialty item, and the back lot where you grew the greens was a parking pad. Number 20, sweet potato and syrup. Sweet potatoes were the cheapest vegetable in the 1950s South. A bushel cost less than $1 at roadside stands. Families who grew their own paid nothing. You baked them until the skin split and the flesh turned orange and soft, then split one open and poured cane syrup or sorghum molasses over the top. That was supper. A baked sweet potato with syrup cost less than 5 cents and filled a grown man enough to sleep through the night. In rural Alabama and Georgia, children ate this 3 or 4 nights a week during winter. The sweet potato was dessert and dinner in one. Grandmothers who kept a garden had bushels stored in the root cellar, and a jug of Alaga syrup lasted a month. Nobody called it a meal plan. Nobody wrote it down. But sweet potato and syrup kept more black families standing through lean months than almost anything else on this list. Number 16, collard greens with ham hocks and pot liquor saved. If your family was black and Southern, the greens were mandatory. Every Easter table had them. But the way they were cooked has changed so much that the original version is nearly gone. A ham hock simmered for 4 to 6 hours with pounds of greens until they turned soft and deeply flavored. The pot liquor, that is the cooking liquid, was saved, served separately, drunk from a cup or sopped up with cornbread. Pouring it down the drain would have been unthinkable. That habit of eating slow-cooked greens and drinking the pot liquor is specifically West African in origin, not European. The greens symbolize money at Easter and New Year's because the flat leaves look like paper currency. A traditional pot required 2 to 3 pounds of greens and 1 smoked ham hock. That hock cost $2 to $3 in the 1960s. It runs $5 to $8 today, plus half a day of your patience. Modern quick recipes cook greens in 30 to 45 minutes. The pot liquor barely has time to form. The nutrition that kept your people alive when there was nothing else gets tossed with the water. That would have broken your grandmother's heart.
Cranberry sauce made from whole berries and sugar water provided the traditional tart sweet condiment without spending money on canned versions that cost 3 times more. Black mothers would buy fresh cranberries when they appeared seasonally in grocery stores, usually paying less than $1 for a pound that made enough sauce for 20 people. The berries were simmered with sugar and water until they burst and thickened into glossy, ruby-red sauce that tasted fresher and brighter than anything from cans. Some women added orange zest when citrus was affordable, while others kept it simple with just berries, sugar, and patience. The sauce could be made days ahead and actually improved with time as flavors melded, making it perfect for busy Thanksgiving preparations. Children loved the sweet tart flavor that contrasted with rich, savory dishes, while adults appreciated the burst of color and acidity that balanced heavy meals.
Number 9, red beans and rice. Monday was wash day in New Orleans, and a pot of red beans could mind itself while the women scrubbed clothes all morning. The tradition was built around Sunday's leftovers. Whatever ham bone or pork bone was left from the Sunday meal went straight into the pot Monday morning, along with a bag of small red beans, an onion, celery, and bell pepper. Then it simmered low for hours, asking for nothing more than an occasional stir while the heavy work of laundry got done. By supper time, The beans had cooked down soft and creamy, the broth gone thick and savory from the bone, and it all got ladled over a bed of white rice. The dish was filling, it was cheap, and it stretched a single bone across a whole pot big enough for everyone. Generations of working families leaned on it precisely because it fed many for the price of few. Creamy beans, smoky pork, and rice that drank up every drop. A Monday institution born from making do. Number 18, baked chicken quarters with onion gravy. Leg and thigh quarters, the cheapest chicken at the store, seasoned and laid in a baking dish with thick slices of onion underneath. A cup of broth went in, aluminum foil sealed the top, and the dish baked for 2.5 hours at low heat. The chicken steamed in its own juices until the meat fell off the bone and the onions melted into a sweet, savory gravy at the bottom of the pan. This was a Sunday dinner that appeared when there was not enough money for a whole bird. 1/4 per person, gravy over rice, greens on the side. Simple enough that a teenager could handle it alone, slow enough that nobody rushed the oven or the afternoon. Number 17, neck bones and egg noodles. Egg noodles were not something every family kept, but the ones who did swore by them. The noodles were wider and denser than spaghetti, and they held up better in a heavy pork broth without turning to mush. Families dropped them into the pot after the neck bones had simmered for 2 hours, and in 15 minutes, the noodles went soft and slippery, coated in rendered fat. The broth thickened from the starch and turned silky in a way that plain water and bones alone never could. In parts of Tennessee and Virginia, this was a cold weather meal that came out when the temperature dropped below freezing and the kitchen windows fogged up from the steam. Children ate the noodles first and went back for the bones, sucking the marrow out and stacking the clean bones on the edge of the plate like a small monument to what had been supper.
Meatloaf with ketchup glaze was the kind of weeknight classic that held families together without anyone realizing it at the time. Grandparents and parents would mix ground meat with breadcrumbs, onions, and whatever seasoning lived in the spice cabinet, shaping it into a loaf that somehow always came out the same, no matter who made it. Then came the glaze, that sweet layer of ketchup spread across the top in thick strokes that caramelized in the oven until it turned sticky, glossy, and just a little smoky around the edges. The smell filled the whole house long before dinner was served, drifting down hallways and under bedroom doors like a promise you could count on. Cutting into the loaf felt almost ceremonial, each slice holding that perfect balance of soft inside and crisp outside. Kids would poke at it, drizzle more ketchup over it, and still come back for seconds without hesitation. It was affordable, dependable, and tasted like routine in the best way. Even today, people crave it because it reminds them of a dinner table where nothing was fancy but everything felt secure. That ketchup glaze was never gourmet, but it was warm, familiar, and a taste memory glued firmly to childhood. And dumplings was a rural supper that leaned on hunting and simple flour cooking to keep families full. Rabbits were easy to catch, making them a dependable protein for those who could not afford store-bought meat. The meat was simmered into tender stews, then patted out with flour dumplings that floated in the broth and stretched the meal further. African American households valued rabbit because it represented self-reliance and survival. Dumplings were cheap, easy to prepare, and gave the pot a hearty feel that turned one rabbit into supper for everyone. The flavor was earthy, comforting, and tied closely to the land where the food came from. Families ate it together after long days in fields or factories, grateful for anything that filled plates. Though game has nearly vanished from modern kitchens, rabbit and dumplings once stood at the center of many suppers. It carried both necessity and comfort, showing how rural traditions shaped African American dinner tables for generations. Cow okra and tomato stew was what summer gardens were made for. A handful of fresh okra, a few ripe tomatoes, and a single onion could fill a whole pot with color and flavor. As the stew simmered, The vegetables broke down into a thick, hearty blend that clung to every spoonful. Some added a little corn or bacon grease for extra body, while others kept it simple and clean. The aroma was bright, tangy, and familiar, the scent of sunshine and soil mixed together. Served over rice or cornbread, it brought warmth even on the hottest days. Okra and tomato stew was proof that when the garden gave, a good cook could feed everyone. The sound of bubbling pots filled porches where families cooled off from long days in the field. It was a meal made with the rhythm of life itself, slow, patient, and rooted in the earth. Even children who wrinkled their noses at okra ended up cleaning their plates once they tasted the soft, rich stew. It was both sustenance and memory, carrying the taste of family gardens, of hands stained with soil and hearts full of pride. In every spoonful was the legacy of those who grew what they ate and made miracles from the ground beneath their feet. You might wrinkle your nose, but fried rattlesnake was a real meal on the frontier. If you were living off the land, you ate what the land gave you, and sometimes that meant a coiled-up surprise near your boots. Rattlesnake meat was surprisingly tender and mild, almost like chicken, and once you peeled the skin and cleaned the bones, it fried up fast. Cornmeal crust gave it crunch, and a sprinkle of pepper or dried herbs gave it flavor. Folks who lived near the desert or in rocky canyons got used to seeing these snakes. Some made it a sport to hunt them, others just got desperate enough to try. Either way, you dipped the meat in egg, rolled it in cornmeal, and dropped it in hot fat. It sizzled, popped, and came out golden. Eaten with dandelion greens or roasted roots, it was more than just edible. It was a story. One you told around a fire long after the danger was gone. Pork roast with brown sugar glaze was Sunday dinner perfection. The meat roasted slow, its surface brushed with a glaze of brown sugar, vinegar, and spice until the edges caramelized to dark gold. The air filled with the scent of sweetness melting into smoke, a perfume of patience and pride. The crust cracked when sliced, revealing tender meat bathed in its own juices. Families carved it together, the knife gliding through as if through memory itself. It was the centerpiece of the table, the reward for a week's labor. That glaze turned ordinary pork into something extraordinary, balancing sweetness and salt like a hymn. Every slice reminded everyone that love could be tasted, that time was the best ingredient of all. The drippings soaked into mashed potatoes or cornbread, each bite richer than the last. It was food that gathered generations, linking past and present with the sound of laughter and plates being passed. The meal lingered in memory long after it was gone, leaving behind warmth, fullness, and the quiet peace of togetherness. It was the taste of devotion, simple and eternal. Stewed chicken backs were one of those meals that turned scraps into sustenance. In the 1960s, the back of the chicken was considered the cheapest cut, with little meat clinging to the bones. My grandmother bought them in bulk, cleaned them, and simmered them for hours with onions, potatoes, and carrots until the broth grew rich and fragrant. The long cooking softened the bits of meat so they slid easily from the bones, creating a meal that was both filling and flavorful. Families served the stew over rice or with cornbread, stretching the broth even further. The dish carried smoky undertones if she added a ham bone or a splash of fatback, but it was nourishing even without extras. What made it memorable was how something so overlooked could still feel satisfying and dignified at the table. Stewed chicken backs reminded families that nothing should be wasted, and even the smallest scraps could anchor a full dinner. It was a meal of patience, thrift, and creativity, proof that the cheapest part of the bird could still feed a household with warmth and pride.
Number 23, chicken neck stew with rice. A Memphis butcher in 1942 sold chicken necks for a nickel a pound, sometimes gave them away on Saturday night. The case had to be empty by Monday. She bought 4 pounds, simmered them in salted water with 1 onion and 3 peppercorns for 2 hours. The meat slid off the bone, the broth ran cloudy, the rice cooked in the pot lacquer, no extra water. The necks went on top to keep warm. She stripped the meat with 2 forks at the table while the children watched and learned. That was how every Memphis cook taught her daughter. The dish fed 7 for 30 cents. The Memphis paper printed it next to a war bond ad and a coupon for canned milk. In those years, nobody threw away the necks. By 1968, the supermarket sold whole chickens, cheap enough that nobody bothered. The butcher case stopped stocking them around 1974. Year after year, the cut got harder to find. You can't even ask for them today. Number 13, liver and onions. Before cholesterol became a word ordinary people knew, liver and onions was a weeknight supper across the South. You sliced beef liver thin, dredged it in seasoned flour, and fried it with onions until the liver was just cooked through and the onions turned sweet and dark. A pound of beef liver cost 35 cents in 1955, cheaper than almost every other cut at the butcher. Doctors recommended liver for anemia, which disproportionately affected Black women and children who had limited access to health care. The taste was strong, almost metallic. Children either ate it without complaint or they did not eat at all. No middle ground, no alternative. But the iron content was extraordinary. A single serving delivered more than a full day's requirement. Nobody prescribed it. Nobody called it a supplement. Grandmothers just knew that liver twice a week kept a family on its feet. Number 21, pineapple upside down cake. The moment your grandmother flipped that cast iron skillet and the cake came out perfect, golden and glistening, the whole kitchen held its breath. Not a single pineapple ring out of place. That flip was the most dramatic moment of Easter dinner. Canned pineapple became widely available after the First World War when the Hawaiian Pineapple Company began marketing it aggressively. In 1925, they held a recipe contest that received 60,000 entries. 2,500 of them were for pineapple upside down cake. A can of pineapple rings cost about 25 cents in the 1940s. The cake required just one 10-inch cast iron skillet, which most Black households already owned. Betty Cook, food columnist for the Afro-American newspaper, celebrated this cake in a 1955 column read by millions of Black Americans. She called it gorgeous with its glistening top. As cast iron cooking declined and box mixes took over, the from scratch skillet version became rare. But if you grew up watching your grandmother hold her breath during that flip, you never forgot. You carry that moment with you.
String beans canned in bulk and seasoned with bacon drippings provided the vegetable side that stretched pennies into portions for crowds, proving preserved vegetables could taste homemade. Black mothers bought cases of canned green beans when on sale, often paying less than 30 cents per can, then transformed them by draining the packing liquid and cooking them down with saved bacon grease. The bacon drippings, carefully stored from breakfast preparations throughout the year, added smoky richness that made even plain canned vegetables taste slow-cooked. Onions sautéed in the drippings first created a flavor base, then the drained beans went into simmer until they softened and absorbed all that porky goodness. Some women added a pinch of sugar to balance saltiness, while others threw in a ham hock if available. The beans weren't crisp tender but cooked until completely soft, the way older generations preferred vegetables. Children usually won over by these bacon-flavored beans.
Number 19, salmon croquettes. Few things smelled more like a Black household waking up than a can of salmon hitting a hot skillet. The dish began with a single tall can of pink salmon, the cheap kind packed in its own salty liquor with the soft bones and skin still inside. The cook would crack it open and tip it into a bowl, then go in with bare hands, crushing the little vertebrae between her fingers because those bones carried calcium and nobody wasted them. In went a beaten egg, a handful of cracker crumbs, or a spoon of cornmeal, finely diced onion, and a shake of black pepper, sometimes a little chopped bell pepper for color and snap. The mixture came together cool and slightly sticky, holding the shape of a patty when pressed between two palms. Then the skillet, a film of hot grease, the wet hiss as each cake went down, and that smell rising through the house, briny and golden, pulling sleeping children out of their beds. They fried until the edges set into a deep mahogany crust and the kitchen window fogged at the corners, grease snapping every time the cook flipped one with the back of a fork. There was a reason this dish appeared so often, and it was not only the price. Government nutrition workers had figured that a single can of salmon mixed with a little flour and one egg held enough protein to unlock the niacin buried in cornmeal and ward off pellagra for a family of 4 when eaten once a week. That made it medicine that tasted like a treat. So it became Sunday food or Saturday night into Sunday food, set out beside a mound of grits or a bowl of rice with a wedge of hot sauce on the rim of the plate. Crisp and craggy outside, moist and flaky within, the little bones gone so soft that no child ever noticed them. A nickel can of fish dressed up into something worth saying grace over. Pigtails and brown gravy. Pigtails were the cheapest pork cut the butcher had, often given away or sold by the pound for almost nothing. Chopped into short sections and browned hard in a skillet, they went into a pot with onions, garlic, soy sauce, and brown sugar. 3 hours of slow simmering turned the cartilage gelatinous and the meat tender, swimming in a thick, dark, slightly sweet gravy. The texture was unlike any other pork dish on the table, sticky, rich, and deeply savory. Pigtails were common in black kitchens from Louisiana through the Carolinas, especially in families with Caribbean roots who brought the technique from the islands. The dish crossed borders the same way the families did. By the 1990s, the cut had vanished from most meat counters, and a generation grew up never knowing it existed. Number 24, smothered neck bones with onion gravy. The bones were browned first in a cast iron skillet, then buried under sliced yellow onions that cooked down until they turned soft and sweet. A little flour went into the pan drippings to thicken it. The gravy built itself around the bones, dark and rich and heavy enough to stand a spoon in. This was not a light meal. This was a plate you set down in front of someone who had been working outside since dawn. The onion gravy went over white bread or biscuits, whatever was in the house, and it stretched that meal another day. In parts of Georgia and the Carolinas, smothered neck bones showed up on Sundays when the family could not afford a proper roast.
Cubed steak with brown gravy was one of those dinners that looked humble on the plate but tasted like it came straight from a diner counter. Families bought cubed steak because it was cheap and already tenderized, those little grid marks pressed into the meat like a promise that it would cook up soft if you treated it right. Into the skillet it went, browning just enough to build flavor before gravy was poured over the top and allowed to simmer until everything thickened and softened together. The smell alone could pull kids away from their cartoons. The meat soaked up the gravy soaked up the flavor from the meat, and together they made a dish that begged to be served over mashed potatoes, letting every drop settle into the grooves. It was the kind of meal that made you sit down, slow down, and let the warmth spread through you. Parents liked it because it fed everyone without costing much, and kids liked it because it was soft, savory, and easy to love. Even today, people crave that plate because it tasted like steadiness, like being cared for, like a time when dinner felt like an anchor at the end of the day. Souse meat with vinegar and peppers was a tangy loaf that turned scraps into something families truly valued. Pig heads, ears, and other parts were boiled down until tender, seasoned with peppers and spices, then cooled until the broth turned gelatinous. Sliced cold, it was eaten with bread or crackers, making a thrifty dinner that filled stomachs when little else was available. African American families appreciated it because it wasted nothing and carried a bold flavor that stood out compared to plainer dishes. The vinegar gave it sharpness, The peppers added heat, and the texture was unlike anything else at the table. Children sometimes hesitated, but for adults it was a taste tied to survival and tradition. It was also served at gatherings, reminding everyone how community meals grew out of resourcefulness. Though rarely made today, souse meat was once a reminder that flavor and thrift could meet in unexpected ways. Its disappearance speaks to changing tastes, but for many it still recalls home and heritage in every bite. Cornmeal mush with gravy was the taste of endurance that outlived the Depression and followed people right into the war years. It began with cornmeal whisked into boiling water, stirred until it thickened into a golden, bubbling paste. Left to set, it became firm enough to slice, fry, or drown in homemade gravy. The texture was soft and filling, the flavor humble but satisfying. For those with little money and big families, it was a meal that stretched as far as it needed to. Mothers would fry slices in bacon grease when they could, or serve it plain with onion gravy made from drippings. The smell of it cooking was a reminder that simplicity did not mean lack. It was food that carried people through, one spoonful at a time. Cornmeal mush was living proof that survival could be seasoned with creativity, that dignity could sit right beside thrift on a dinner plate. Riverside meals were always about what you could pull out of the water, and catfish was as good as it got. Thick-bodied, whiskered, and slippery, they were a challenge to catch but worth every second of the fight. Once cleaned, the fillets were dunked in flour or cornmeal and fried in a skillet over open flame until they sizzled brown at the edges. The oil crackled, and the fish turned crisp on the outside and soft as butter inside. What made this dish stand out, though, was the sorghum vinegar sauce. Made from syrup cooked down with sharp vinegar and sometimes a dash of wild herbs, it was poured over the catfish just before eating. The sweetness hit first, then the tang, then the smoke from the fire itself. It was an evening meal that brought comfort after long days of river labor or ferry hauls. Served with beans or wild greens, it was not fancy, but it had bite. And in a world where meat came with risk, the catfish was a dependable gift. If you knew how to clean it right, season it just enough and keep your fire steady, you could turn a slippery catch into something you would dream about again tomorrow. Fried trout with cornmeal crust was the flavor of rivers, of long afternoons spent with fishing lines and laughter. The trout, caught fresh, was rolled in seasoned cornmeal until coated in gold. Dropped into a skillet of hot lard, it hissed and crackled like applause. When pulled out, it gleamed, crisp outside, tender within. The first bite was pure joy, salty, crunchy, and clean, like sunlight and water turned edible. Families gathered outside, eating straight from paper plates, fingers greasy, hearts light. The fish needed no sauce, no garnish, only lemon and a memory of patience. Fried trout was more than food. It was a reward for stillness, for skill, for faith that work would be met with grace. It was river and home combined, a southern hymn sung through every crisp bite. The breeze carried laughter, the oil popped in rhythm, and the air smelled of summer's reward. Every meal was a memory written in golden crust and gentle pride. Rice and molasses supper was one of the simplest meals, but also one of the most remembered. A pot of rice was inexpensive, filling, and always on hand, but paired with a drizzle of molasses, it turned into something sweet and sustaining. Sugar was too costly for everyday use, but molasses was affordable and sold in larger tins that seemed to last forever. Families poured it over steaming bowls of rice, letting the dark syrup seep into the grains until they gleamed. The taste was rich, almost smoky, with just enough sweetness to make children smile. It was often eaten at the end of the day when no meat could be spared, and it carried people through the night with enough strength to face the next morning. My grandmother told me rice and molasses was a treat disguised as necessity, proof that resourcefulness could soften the edge of scarcity. In the 1960s, when Black families were stretching every dollar, rice and molasses kept hunger at bay while still offering a touch of comfort. Simple, cheap, and unforgettable, it was a meal born of need but remembered with love.
Number 13, skillet cornbread with cracklings. A 12-inch cast iron skillet on a wood stove in 1942 Tuskegee, heated until a drop of water danced across the surface. The cook rendered a half pound of pork fat into golden cracklings the day before. Set them in a tin on the back of the stove. The batter was 2 cups yellow cornmeal, 1 egg, a cup of buttermilk, a teaspoon of soda. The cracklings folded in last. She poured a tablespoon of bacon grease into the hot skillet, swirled it around the sides, dropped the batter in with a hiss that brought the children in from the yard. The cornbread baked 20 minutes, came out with a brown crust thick enough to crack with a spoon. It fed 6 for 7 cents, eaten standing at the stove with a glass of cold milk. That was supper. Your grandmother kept hers in a Maxwell House tin she had saved since the war. Every kitchen in your town kept cracklings on the back of the stove. By 1985, the cracklings came in a bag from the gas station and the cornbread came from a box. You wouldn't know to ask for the real thing. Number 18, crackling bread. When a hog was slaughtered in the fall, the skin was cut into pieces and rendered in a wash pot until the fat melted and the skin turned into crunchy golden bits called cracklings. Those cracklings went straight into cornbread batter. The result was bread that crackled when you bit into it, rich with pork flavor and studded with crispy pieces that gave every slice a different texture. A pan of crackling bread sat on the counter for 3 days and still tasted good. In rural Georgia and the Carolinas, crackling bread with a glass of buttermilk was a complete supper. The cost was nothing because the cracklings were a byproduct of making lard, which was itself a byproduct of the hog killing. The hog gave meat for the smokehouse, fat for the lard bucket, and cracklings for the bread. Harper Lee wrote about crackling bread in her novel's pages. Black families in the Deep South did not write about it, they just ate it. Here's where things get honest. The meals on this list were not cooked by people who had choices. They were cooked by women standing in kitchens after 10 hours of working in someone else's kitchen. Women who fed white families during the day and came home to feed their own on whatever was left in the cupboard. A woman standing at a stove at 8 at night, frying cornbread in silence, setting a plate for children who did not know that dinner had already been uncertain twice that week. These meals solved more than hunger. They solved the problem of dignity. When a plate looked full and the food was hot and the table was set, a family could sit down and feel like the day had not beaten them. A full plate in a Jim Crow kitchen was an act of defiance. These women were not following recipes. They were holding families together with cornmeal and cast iron. Number 18, baked macaroni and cheese. The Easter version was not the stovetop kind. It was a custard-style casserole baked with eggs and evaporated milk until it came out firm enough to slice. Golden brown, crust on top. Every family had a slightly different recipe, and the debate over sharp cheddar versus Velveeta could divide a congregation faster than a new pastor. Here's the part you probably do not know. The man credited with preparing one of the first macaroni and cheese dishes in America was James Hemings, born 1765, enslaved by Thomas Jefferson from birth. Jefferson took him to Paris in the 1780s, where Hemings trained in French cuisine. He brought the recipe back to Virginia. Hemings negotiated his own freedom in 1796. Let that sit with you. One of the very few enslaved chefs to ever do so. He died in 1801 at age 36. A block of sharp cheddar cost 30 cents a pound in the 1940s. It runs $5 to $7 now. An enslaved black man made macaroni and cheese for the president who owned him. Then it became the most beloved dish at free black Easter tables. That tells you everything about who really built this country's food culture. Here is something nobody talks about when they talk about Easter dinner. For Black families during Jim Crow, Easter Sunday was the one day you ate like royalty in your own home. The rest of the year, segregation told you where to eat, where to sit, which water fountain to drink from. But on Easter Sunday, inside those walls, none of that existed. The table was set with the best china. Children wore brand new outfits. The food had to be immaculate, not because anyone was coming to inspect it, because dignity required it. After the Great Migration, when over 7 million Black Americans left the South between 1915 and 1970, Easter dinner became proof that home still existed. A family in Bronzeville or Harlem would set a table that looked exactly like the one back in Mississippi. Same ham, same greens, same cake, recipes carried in memory across 1,000 miles. Easter dinner was not about showing off. It was about refusing to be diminished.
Cornbread dressing, made from dried-out bread and day-old cornbread, turned stale leftovers into the savory stuffing that anchored Thanksgiving plates throughout Black communities. Mothers saved bread ends, biscuit pieces, and cornbread scraps in bags for weeks before the holiday, letting them air dry until rock hard so they'd absorb maximum liquid without turning mushy. On Thanksgiving morning, those saved breads would be crumbled and mixed with sautéed celery, onions, and sage, then moistened with chicken broth made from boiling backs and necks. Some women added finely chopped giblets, while others relied purely on vegetables and herbs for flavor. The dressing had to be moist enough to hold together but dry enough to crisp on top when baked. This wasn't bread cubes from expensive store-bought loaves, but carefully accumulated scraps transformed through skill. The golden brown top provided textural contrast to soft interior. For Black families, cornbread dressing represented resourcefulness, elevated to tradition.
Number 14, dirty rice. The name came from the way chopped chicken livers and gizzards speckled the white grains until the whole pot looked dirty. This was thrift cooking at its cleverest. The giblets that came tucked inside every chicken, the parts most kitchens discarded, were finely chopped and browned in a skillet with onion, celery, and bell pepper. That savory mixture got folded into cooked rice along with the pan drippings, staining the grains brown and loading them with deep, meaty flavor. A whole skillet of it cost almost nothing because the most expensive thing in it was the rice. It stretched a few cents of organ meat across a dish big enough to feed everyone, and it tasted far richer than its price. Working families across the South kept it in heavy rotation precisely because it turned scraps into something that ate like real meat, bold, savory, and proof that flavor never needed money. A full pot born from the parts other folks threw away. Smothered pork chops, bone-in pork chops, thick cut and seasoned with salt, black pepper, garlic powder, and onion powder were dredged through seasoned flour and browned in a cast iron skillet until the coating turned golden on both sides. The chops came out and a full onion, sliced thin, went into the same pan with the drippings. The onions cooked down until they softened and started to color. Then a few spoonfuls of flour went in to make a roux right there in the pan. Water or broth loosened everything into a gravy, and the chops went back in, nestled into the sauce with the onions draped over the top. The lid went on, and the heat dropped to the lowest flame the stove could hold. For the next 2 hours, that skillet sat untouched. The gravy thickened around the meat, the flour coating on the chops dissolved into the sauce, and the onions broke down until they were no longer slices, but part of the liquid itself. The pork turned so tender that the bone pulled clean with no resistance. The gravy left behind was not something poured from a jar. It built itself from the meat, the flour, the onion, and the long patience of a covered pan. Smothered pork chops were the Sunday dinner that required no occasion and no announcement. The cook picked up a package of chops on Saturday, and by noon on Sunday, the house smelled like onion gravy and black pepper, and everyone knew what was coming. It was dependable food, made the same way every time, and it carried the weight of a real meal without the cost of a roast. The dish lost its hold when boneless chops replaced bone-in cuts, and oven-baked recipes replaced the slow skillet. A smothered chop cannot be made fast. The whole point was the waiting, and the waiting is what disappeared. Number 23, neck bones and mustard greens. Mustard greens had a bite that no other green in the garden could match. Raw, they burned the back of the tongue. Cooked low in a pot of neck bones for 2 hours, that burn softened into a peppery warmth that cut clean through the richness of the pork. Families in Alabama and Mississippi planted mustard greens alongside collards, but the mustard came up faster and tolerated poorer soil. The leaves were thinner, more ragged, and they shrank down to almost nothing in the pot, which meant you needed a bigger armload to fill a bowl. The pot liquor ran pale green with a sharp edge that some people preferred over the heavier, darker liquor from collards. Children who turned their noses up at the greens still sopped the liquor with cornbread because that peppery broth tasted like the bones dressed up in something new. This was a weeknight pot that asked for nothing but time, a handful of greens, and whatever neck bones the butcher had left.
Sweet pea and potato casserole was one of those gentle, unassuming dishes that fed families through tight budgets and busy lives. It came together from pantry staples: canned peas, diced potatoes, a bit of cream or broth, and whatever seasoning happened to be nearby. Once baked, it softened into a creamy, comforting dish that tasted like warmth itself. It was not bold, not spicy, not dramatic, but it did not need to be. It was the kind of food that sat quietly on the table, filling plates and stomachs without fanfare. Kids often pushed peas around their plates only to realize, bite by bite, that the casserole actually tasted pretty good. Adults appreciated that it stretched ingredients far enough to feed everyone while still feeling whole. It tasted like a memory of soft kitchen light and evenings that moved slowly. Even now, there is something deeply soothing about the simplicity of peas and potatoes baked together, reminding people that comfort does not need to be complicated. Boiled collards with salted fish was a dish rooted in coastal traditions, where dried or salted fish met the greens of the field. Collard greens, simmered long with pieces of fish, absorbed the salty flavor and produced a broth that families called pot liquor. Served with cornbread on the side, it became a full meal that delivered both nutrition and satisfaction. This dish tied African American kitchens to older traditions of using preserved fish as seasoning when fresh meat was unavailable. The salt balanced the bitterness of the collards while the fish gave body and protein to the broth. Families loved it because it was affordable and could feed everyone at the table. Children might not have enjoyed the strong flavor, but it carried cultural meaning that extended beyond taste. Though rarely seen today, boiled collards with salted fish once represented a connection between land and sea, resourcefulness and survival, and the enduring tradition of turning simple ingredients into communal suppers. Pinto bean cakes were genius in their simplicity. Leftover beans from last night's pot were mashed, mixed with flour and onions, and fried until golden brown. What had started as scraps became something new, something delicious. The cakes were crisp at the edges and soft in the center, hearty enough to stand on their own or to sit beside rice or greens. It was a meal made by hands that refused to waste, by people who understood that nothing in the kitchen should ever be thrown away. The scent of frying bean cakes was homely and warm, a small reward for hard work. Each bite tasted of thrift, resourcefulness, and quiet pride. It was proof that survival could be creative, and that good cooking never depended on wealth, only wisdom. The sound of the pan crackling was the sound of resilience itself. A sprinkle of salt, a turn of the spatula, and the world felt right again. Served with hot sauce or ketchup, they turned into a feast from the plainest of ingredients. Bean cakes taught children early on that waste was not an option. and that love could be fried up right alongside supper. Sourdough was the cowboy's best friend, and not just for bread. You could take a little jar of starter across states and still have breakfast wherever you went. These flapjacks were not sweet or soft. They were chewy, dense, and packed with tang from the ferment. Fried right on a skillet greased with leftover pork fat, they went great with salt pork slices, heavily salted meat that was soaked and boiled until edible. Nobody called it elegant, but it worked. Cowboys ate it in the morning if they were lucky, or as a dinner when rations ran low. Salt pork was cheap, kept forever, and did not need refrigeration, which meant it could follow you to the middle of nowhere. These meals were eaten sitting on the ground, leaning against your saddle, with the fire crackling just out of reach. You did not eat for flavor. You ate because tomorrow was another 10 miles and you were already sore. This was fuel, not a feast, but it was also comfort in a place where comfort was rare. Boiled crabs with corn and potatoes were summer joy made edible. The pot bubbled over open fire, steam carrying the scent of spice and salt across the yard. Red potatoes, sweet corn, and crabs seasoned with cayenne and garlic turned every backyard into a feast. Families stood around tables covered in newspaper, cracking shells, laughing loud, fingers stained with seasoning. There were no fancy plates, no quiet moments, only music, chatter, and the shared rhythm of pulling meat from shell. It was messy, glorious work, and no one minded. The spice burned just enough to make you reach for sweet tea. Boiled crab night was not about formality, it was about community. Everyone left full, sticky, and happy with stories to tell long after the last pot was emptied. It was the taste of summer freedom, the kind that wrapped you in laughter and warmth, reminding everyone that the best meals were meant to be shared under open skies. Fish head stew was a dish born out of necessity, yet it carried surprising depth and flavor. Fish heads, often discarded by others, were simmered slowly with onions, potatoes, and rice until they yielded every ounce of richness to the broth. My grandmother insisted the heads made the stew better than fillies, providing body and nourishment that nothing else could. The bones and skin flavored the liquid until it turned hearty and comforting. Potatoes stretched the meal, rice thickened it, and vegetables added substance, turning scraps into a filling supper. The taste was strong, earthy, and unforgettable, reminding everyone that no part of food should go unused. For Black families in the 1960s, fish head stew was a common way to stretch the catch of the day, ensuring nothing went to waste. It became a lesson in thrift and gratitude, proof that survival demanded creativity. Fish head stew was both humble and mighty, sustaining families through lean times with flavor and tradition.
Number 14, Sunday neck bones with rice and pot liquor, the dish that anchored the family table from Mississippi to Memphis, a blue speckled roaster on a cold range in 1949 Greenwood. 4 pounds of pork neck bones rinsed and salted, laid in a single layer. The cook poured a quart of water over them, added 1 yellow onion sliced rough, 3 garlic cloves crushed under a knife, a bay leaf, a long shake of black pepper. She covered the pot with a heavy iron lid, slid it to the back burner. The heat ran low. For 3 hours, the neck bones rendered their fat. The bones gave up their marrow into a dark, glossy pot liquor. The kitchen smelled like every Sunday she could remember from her own mother's kitchen in Yazoo City. The same smell rose at the same hour from every Black household for 1,000 miles. The rice cooked in a separate pot with the broth and a teaspoon of lard. The bones came out. She laid them on a platter under a clean dish towel. The gravy was thickened with a slurry of flour and cold water. She served the rice in a bowl, ladled pot lacquer into the center, piled the meat from the bones on top, a side of stewed cabbage with bacon ends. The Sunday after the funeral, she made it for 35 people in the church basement. 9 pounds of neck bones. The butcher sold her for $2 and a kind word about her late husband. The pot liquor that day fed mourners who had not eaten since Friday afternoon. By 1990, the supermarket had stopped stocking neck bones that big. The recipe survived only in the heads of women born before 1955. The dish was the working answer to a paycheck that ran out before payday. It wasn't the recipe that died, it was the cut. A cook could buy 4 pounds for a quarter once. You can't find them at all now. You can't even ask the butcher. That's how a tradition disappears without anyone noticing the day it left. Number 24, buttermilk and cornbread. A bowl, a piece of cold cornbread left from yesterday, a glass of buttermilk poured over the top. You crumbled the cornbread into the buttermilk with your fingers the way your grandmother did and her grandmother before that, and ate it with a spoon. The cornbread softened in the tangy liquid and became something between cereal and bread pudding. Cold, sharp filling. No stove required, no heat, no effort beyond lifting a spoon. Generation after generation, the same bowl, the same spoon. Buttermilk cost 20 cents a quart in the 1950s. Cornbread was already on the counter because cornbread was always on the counter. In Black households, from the Delta to the Piedmont, this was not a recipe anyone invented. It evolved across generations, passed from hand to hand. When a grandmother in Alabama crumbled cornbread into buttermilk, she was doing what her mother did in the same kitchen with the same bowl. The meal was not about flavor, it was about continuity. Number 23, hog jowl and black-eyed peas. Most people think of this as a New Year's dish. It was, but during the Depression and Jim Crow, it showed up on Easter tables too, in homes where a whole ham was a dream your family could not afford. Hog jowl was the cheek of the pig, 15 cents at the butcher. Black-eyed peas were 10 cents a pound. Together, they fed your whole family for a quarter. That was the entire cost of your Easter dinner, about $5.50 in today's money. Black-eyed peas were not even American. They came from West Africa, where cowpeas had been cultivated for centuries before the slave trade brought them across the ocean. Food historian Michael Twitty traced that journey in his book, The Cooking Gene, following the cowpea from the fields of Senegambia to the tables of Georgia. On your Easter Sunday, those peas symbolized coins, prosperity, hope. For a family shut out of every door America had, a pot of peas was not failure. It was a declaration. We will eat well and together no matter what.
Giblet gravy made from turkey or chicken organ meats transformed parts that many discarded into rich, flavorful sauce that elevated every dish it touched. When families could afford even a small bird, Black mothers saved the neck, liver, heart, and gizzard, chopping them fine and simmering them with onions and celery until tender. The organs added depth and richness that plain flour gravy could never match, creating sauce with body and complexity that tasted like hours of work. Some women strained out the meat pieces for texture-sensitive children, while others left everything in for those who appreciated authentic preparations. The gravy was thickened with flour mixed into the drippings, creating perfect consistency that coated everything without being gluey. Poured over dressing, mashed potatoes, rice, or biscuits, giblet gravy made every component taste richer. This was resourceful cooking at its finest, using parts that cost nothing extra.
When the grocery money ran out 3 days before the check came, eggs and rice with tomato gravy kept the lights on inside the body. This was Depression-era arithmetic carried through generations of Black kitchens. A dozen eggs for 30 cents in the 1940s, a cup of rice from a bulk sack, and a can of tomatoes that stretched across 2 meals. Rice cooked plain, eggs scrambled soft in a skillet with butter or bacon grease, pulled off the heat while still wet so they wouldn't turn rubbery. The tomato gravy came together in the same pan. Canned tomatoes crushed by hand, a little sugar to cut the acid, salt, and a spoonful of flour to thicken it. Everything went into one bowl. Eggs on rice, gravy over both. And for a few minutes, the kitchen smelled like someone was taking care of you, even if that someone was yourself. The old ones could tell by the color of the gravy whether it had been made with love or just made to get through. Number 9, baked lima bean casserole. Dried large lima beans, soaked overnight, then simmered with a smoked ham bone until tender. They were drained, mixed with molasses, mustard, onion, and a splash of vinegar, then poured into a baking dish with the ham bone set in the center. The casserole baked covered for 3 hours, the beans darkening and the sauce thickening into a glaze that coated each one. The molasses caramelized along the edges of the dish, leaving a crust that had to be scraped loose and fought over. This was a dish that bridged the line between dinner and dessert, sweet enough to satisfy but anchored by the smoke of the pork and the mineral taste of the beans. Lima beans were a pantry staple in black kitchens, where a bag of dried beans and a leftover bone could feed a household without a trip to the store. When convenience won and baked beans came in a can with a label, the homemade version lost its foothold and the casserole dish went back to the cabinet. Number 22, neck bones and green beans. Fresh green beans snapped between the fingers came out of the garden all summer long, and when there were too many to eat raw or fry up quick, they went into the neck bone pot. The beans cooked until they lost every trace of crunch and turned soft and gray-green, saturated with pork fat. Nobody in those kitchens wanted a crisp green bean. Crisp meant undercooked. Done meant the bean had given up its resistance and taken on the flavor of everything around it. A plate of neck bones and green beans with a cold glass of buttermilk beside it was a July supper that did not try to impress anyone. It just filled the house with the smell of slow pork and kept the family quiet until the sun went down. In parts of rural Arkansas and East Texas, families strung green beans on thread and hung them to dry for winter, then rehydrated them in a neck bone pot months later. Those dried beans, called leather britches, came back tougher and chewier with a concentrated flavor the fresh ones never had. Number 21, neck bone and potato stew. Potatoes were the great stretcher. When the neck bones alone were not enough to fill the table, you cut up 4 or 5 russet potatoes and dropped them into the pot. They soaked up the broth and broke down at the edges, thickening everything into something closer to a stew than a soup. Families who had moved north to Chicago and Detroit during the Great Migration kept this meal alive in cramped apartment kitchens. The pot was smaller, but the method was the same. You browned the bones, covered them with water, seasoned them, and waited. The potatoes went in during the last hour. When they were soft enough to mash against the side of the pot with a wooden spoon, dinner was ready.
Pot roast with carrots and onions was the Sunday ritual that made the whole house smell like home before you even opened your eyes. The roast went into a heavy pot early in the day, searing first before settling into a long simmer with onions, carrots, and maybe a potato or two. Hours passed, the aroma grew richer, and by evening the meat was tender enough to fall apart under the slightest pressure. This was not just a meal, it was a gathering point, a reason for everyone to show up at the table. The vegetables soaked up the broth, turning sweet and soft, and the whole pot felt like comfort poured into a single dish. People still crave it because it tasted like stability, like being cared for, like the end of a long week wrapped neatly in gravy. Cow tongue stew was another dish that stretched thrift into flavor, simmering what others discarded into something deeply satisfying. Tongue was cheap and often overlooked, but when braised slowly with onions, peppers, and garlic, it became tender and rich. The meat had a texture similar to roast beef, making it both hearty and comforting. Families who could not afford expensive cuts relied on tongue as an affordable way to bring meat to the table. Served over rice or potatoes, it filled plates and stomachs without emptying wallets. Though some children avoided it once they knew what it was, many still loved the taste and never forgot it. Cow tongue stew represented resilience, using skill and patience to make overlooked parts of the animal delicious. Today it is rare to see it served, but in the 1950s it was a sign of both thrift and pride in the kitchen. It showed that nothing was wasted and everything could be made into supper. Churn milk soup was what you made when you had finished making butter and still needed a meal. That leftover buttermilk became the base for a tangy, hearty soup that could feed a family from a single pot. It was mixed with cornmeal, herbs, and whatever vegetables were on hand, then simmered until it thickened like velvet. The smell was sharp but cozy, filling the kitchen with warmth and familiarity. Some families dropped bits of bread into the bowl, letting it soak up the flavor. It was simple food, born from old farm routines and frugal wisdom. Churn milk soup taught that nothing should ever be wasted, not even the scraps of a good day's work. It soothed hunger and reminded everyone that comfort could come from the most ordinary things. With each spoonful, it carried the echo of laughter and work from generations before. This was the beating heart of cowboy cooking. Beans and bacon went everywhere, from wagon trains to cattle drives to back porch suppers. You started with pinto beans, dried and soaked overnight if you had the time. They were tossed into a big pot with water and a heavy slab of salt-cured bacon. That bacon was not the kind you fry for breakfast. It was dense, brined, and meant to last. As it cooked, the beans soaked up all the fat and salt, turning soft and smoky. You stirred it with a wooden spoon, checked the fire, and hoped it would be done by sundown. There were no frills. Just beans, pork, and patience. If you had a biscuit or a chunk of cornbread on the side, you counted yourself lucky. This was a meal that stuck with you, gave you warmth, and made sure you could ride or work all the next day. Rabbit was one of the few meats you did not have to buy. You trapped it, you skinned it, you cooked it over a low flame and gave thanks for every bite. Chicken gizzard stew with potatoes was a dish of patience and pride, made from ingredients that asked for time, not money. The gizzards, cleaned and simmered for hours, turned tender as butter while the potatoes soaked up their flavor like old friends. The broth thickened slowly, heavy with black pepper, onion, and just enough salt to make it sing. It was a dish built for strength, the kind of meal that kept families full through long days and colder nights. Grandma served it with hot cornbread on the side, steam rising as the scent filled the house with comfort. Every bite carried the memory of thrift and tenderness, proof that good food did not have to come from plenty. Children learned early that flavor came from effort, not expense. It was the kind of stew that tasted like survival and love stirred into one pot. The gizzards were no luxury, but they became something close to sacred when cooked slow and seasoned with care. It was nourishment, but it was also pride, a reminder that nothing went to waste in a kitchen that knew its worth. Boiled turnips with cornbread crumbs was another way families stretched cheap vegetables into full meals. Turnips were easy to grow and often given away, their strong flavor softened by boiling them until tender. My grandmother ladled the hot turnips into bowls and topped them with crumbled cornbread, the bread soaking up the broth until it became hearty enough for supper. It was plain food, yes, but it kept stomachs full on nights when meat was scarce. The bitterness of the turnips mellowed with time and seasoning, and the cornbread gave every bite body and comfort. Children might have grumbled, but they ate their fill because there was no room for waste. In the 1960s, this dish was common across kitchens that relied on ingenuity to make ends meet. It was a simple combination, yet it carried dignity because it represented survival. Boiled turnips with cornbread crumbs may not have been fancy, but it held families together through lean times.
Number 19, hominy and fatback grits, a low-country Sunday breakfast that ruled kitchens from Charleston to Savannah. A 10-quart pot on a propane burner in 1948 Charleston. 3 cups of dried hominy soaked overnight in lye water made from wood ash. Rinsed twice in the morning. The fatback was cured pork belly with the rind on. The cook sliced it thick with a butcher knife she had sharpened every Saturday for 30 years. She rendered it slow until the cracklings floated golden. The grease ran clear. She lifted the cracklings out with a slotted spoon, set them on brown paper for a sandwich the next day, stirred the hominy into the rendered fat for 40 minutes. The kernels burst soft and golden. Salt and black pepper were the only seasoning. The pot fed 9 for 20 cents. A field hand ate it for breakfast, walked 4 miles to the field, worked through to supper without complaint. The fatback rind went into a paper sack on the back porch, got fried up the next day on a wedge of cornbread. The dish was the working answer to a Lent that lasted past Easter. The hominy came from a Geechee mill that ground corn the same way the Gullah women had for centuries. The recipe moved from mother to daughter like a Bible verse. This was the kind of cooking nobody had a name for yet. It sat on every Sunday table you walked past from Charleston to Savannah. By 1962, the lye treatment was banned in commercial kitchens. Home cooks switched to canned hominy. The texture wasn't the same. The dish quietly disappeared. The recipe survived only in the heads of women born before 1948. Number 14, fried corn. Have you ever tasted corn cut straight off the cob into a hot skillet? Not canned corn, not corn on the cob. Corn cut fresh off the cob with a sharp knife, then scraped with the back of the blade to get the milk out. That corn milk was the whole trick. You put it all into a hot skillet with bacon grease and cooked it down until the corn turned creamy and slightly caramelized, almost like a thick pudding. Salt and pepper. That was it. In the 1950s, families who kept a garden had corn every night during August and September. The corn was free. The bacon grease was saved in a can by the stove. The whole dish cost nothing and tasted like summer concentrating itself into one skillet. Black families in the Carolinas and Virginia called it fried corn even though it was closer to a stew. The name did not matter. What mattered was that a mother could walk to the garden's edge, pull 6 ears, and have supper on the table in 20 minutes. Here is something the food industry understood about black families in the 1950s and never said out loud. The foods that kept these families alive had the lowest profit margins in the grocery store. Cornmeal, dried beans, rice, fatback, sweet potatoes, canned tomatoes. You cannot build a brand around a bag of cornmeal. You cannot run a television commercial for fatback. There is no jingle for pot liquor. So the industry replaced these foods with processed alternatives that cost more and delivered less. Each replacement was marketed as progress, but the processed version cost 3 times as much and left the person hungrier 2 hours later. The women who cooked these dinners were not old-fashioned. They were efficient. They fed families of 8 on less than $1 a day with ingredients nobody could put a logo on. The market punished that efficiency because there was no profit in a bag of dried beans. Number 20, hoghead cheese. In Louisiana, the butcher made a special Easter batch. Hoghead cheese was not cheese at all. It was a cold-cut terrin made from boiled pig parts. Head, feet, ears, tongue, all of it simmered until the natural gelatin from the bones set the meat into a mold. Vinegar kept it preserved. You sliced it thin and spread it on saltines, or stuffed it into a po' boy, or cubed it and ate it like actual cheese. The Poche family of Breaux Bridge, Louisiana, has been making hoghead cheese commercially since 1962. They are one of the last traditional operations in the state. The number of Louisiana butcher shops making house-made hoghead cheese for Easter has declined by an estimated 70% since the 1980s. This was the ultimate expression of making something from nothing. The parts of the animal nobody else wanted turned into something so good that butchers sold it in special Easter molds because even scraps deserve to be celebrated. Today, it sells for $8 to $10 a pound. If you are under 40, you have probably never tasted it.
Black-eyed peas cooked with onions and bacon fat carried both flavor and cultural significance, representing good fortune traditions that connected families to their Southern roots and African heritage. Black mothers prepared black-eyed peas for Thanksgiving as practice for New Year's Day when they'd serve them for luck, creating consistency in holiday cooking that children recognized and anticipated. The peas themselves cost less than beans, making them even more economical, and they cooked faster while still providing complete protein when served alongside cornbread or rice. Bacon fat, saved throughout the year, seasoned the peas with smoky richness, while onions added sweetness and depth that made even simple preparations taste complex. Some families added tomatoes or peppers when available, but the core remained peas, onions, and pork fat, simmered until tender. Children grew up associating black-eyed peas with celebration and family, understanding that these humble legumes carried meaning beyond mere nutrition.
Number 12, stewed pig feet. The part of the hog nobody else wanted became a supper that simmered all afternoon and fell off the bone. When a pig was butchered, the feet were among the lowliest scraps, mostly skin, bone, and connective tissue handed off cheap or for nothing at all. But Black Southern cooks understood that low and slow heat would turn that tough joint into something rich. They scrubbed the feet clean, split them, and dropped them into a pot of water with an onion, a few peppercorns, and a little vinegar to cut the heaviness. Then the pot simmered for 3 or 4 hours until the connective tissue broke down into a soft, gelatinous tenderness and the meat slid away from the bone. The broth thickened on its own from all that natural gelatin. Some folks ate them straight from the pot with a splash of hot sauce. Others pickled them in vinegar to keep on the counter as a snack. Served over rice with a piece of bread to sop the broth, this dish proved the patience could feed a family on what others discarded. Tender, sticky, and gone too soon from the table. Number 13, chitlins. Chitterlings required a full day before they ever touched the stove. Cleaned, scraped, and rinsed in cold water over and over until the water ran clear, they demanded a level of preparation that no other cut of pork required. Once clean, the intestines were cut into short lengths, placed into a large pot with onion, garlic, bay leaves, red pepper flakes, and apple cider vinegar, and simmered for 4 to 5 hours. The smell was unmistakable and unapologetic. It filled the house and drifted into the yard, and anyone who grew up in a household that cooked chitlins knew that smell meant Sunday. The finished product was tender, chewy, and deeply savory, served with hot sauce and vinegar on the side. Chitlins were the most labor-intensive Sunday meal in the Black kitchen and the most divisive. You either grew up eating them or you did not, and there was rarely a middle ground. When the younger generation refused the cleaning work and the smell, the pot stopped appearing, and a tradition that stretched back to slavery ended at the kitchen door. Number 15, neck bones and field peas. Field peas are smaller and earthier than black-eyed peas, with a mineral taste that comes from the iron in the soil where they grew. They were a garden staple across the rural South, and when the fresh pods came in during summer, families shelled them on the porch in the evening and cooked them the next morning with whatever bones were in the house. Neck bones and field peas made a pot that could be served 3 ways across a week. The first night, straight from the pot with cornbread. The second night, over rice with hot sauce. The third night, mashed up and reheated in a skillet with a little bacon grease until the edges got crispy. That third version, the fried down leftovers, was sometimes the best one. Nothing in the pot changed, only the method changed, and the meal felt new each time.
Chicken pot pie, whether frozen from the store or made from scratch at home, felt like a small luxury in the 1960s kitchen. The golden crust, flaky and warm, opened up to a creamy filling of chicken, peas, and carrots that tasted far richer than its price. Kids treated it like a special treat, watching steam rise as the crust cracked open. Parents appreciated that it fed everyone without requiring much work, especially on colder evenings. It was a dish that felt celebratory even on ordinary days. And for many, that bubbling filling remains one of the strongest edible memories from childhood. The smell alone made the house feel cozier, like the walls were holding in a little more warmth than usual. Families often gathered around the table a bit faster when pot pie was involved, eager for that first spoonful that blended soft vegetables with tender chicken. Even now, one bite can bring back entire scenes from the past, the kind lit by soft kitchen lights and the hum of a quiet night settling in. Poke salad greens were one of the most unusual and risky dinners that families once depended on during lean times. Pokeweed grew wild in fields and ditches, but it contained toxins that required repeated boiling before it could be safely eaten. After being boiled several times, the tender greens were fried in bacon grease, creating a dish that was flavorful and filling despite its humble origins. For African American households in rural areas, poke salad greens represented the practice of foraging when store-bought vegetables were too costly. They were seasonal, unpredictable, and sometimes the only green food available. The dish carried both danger and ingenuity, showing how families turned nature's weeds into supper. Cornbread often sat alongside the plate, soaking up the grease and juices. Though nearly forgotten today, poke salad greens were once a staple in communities where self-reliance meant survival. They reflected both courage and creativity in the kitchen, an echo of a time when every meal required effort, knowledge, and a willingness to make do. Grease gravy rice was what people cooked when they refused to let anything go to waste. When breakfast meats were done frying, the leftover grease became treasure. A spoon of flour went in first, sizzling and popping until it turned golden. Then milk or water got poured in, slow and steady, until it thickened into smooth gravy. That hot gravy poured over white rice made something out of nearly nothing. It was salty, creamy, and smoky all at once. The smell filled the house and the taste filled the stomach. Parents called it breakfast, but it could carry a family through an entire day. It came from kitchens that knew survival like a second language, where flavor was earned from thrift and patience. Kids grew up thinking it was comfort food, not knowing it was born from rationing and struggle. Grease gravy rice was more than a recipe. It was a declaration that no meal was too small to matter. Every bite was a promise that the family would eat, even when times were lean. It was humble food that carried pride on a spoon. This was no frozen grocery store pie. Venison pot pie came from hunters and homesteaders, made with fresh-shot deer meat that had been stewed for hours over low heat. It was mixed with carrots, potatoes, or wild onions if you had them, and poured into a rough pie crust made from flour and lard. The crust was thick, never flaky, and it needed to be. It had to hold up against days-old stew and keep well without a refrigerator. The pie would bake in a heavy Dutch oven, often buried in coals, while the smell filled the entire cabin. It was a special dinner, usually reserved for after a good hunt or around holidays when families gathered. You could slice it like cake and serve it warm or cold. It tasted like salt, smoke, and hard-earned luck. If you had enough venison to make two, you stored one under a towel for the next day. No one ever said no to a second helping. This cabbage and corned beef hash was the pantry's promise kept. Canned corned beef sizzled in cast iron, melting into onions and potatoes until crispy at the edges. Shredded cabbage followed, softening in the fat and salt until every bite turned rich and smoky. It was a one-pan wonder, hearty enough to stand alone, humble enough to belong anywhere. For families on tight budgets, it was comfort that did not ask for apology. The kitchen filled with a scent that felt both savory and safe. Served with biscuits or rice, it fed many and left none hungry. It was proof that flavor could bloom even from a can, that dignity lived in every meal made with heart. The potatoes browned just enough to crunch, while the cabbage melted into sweetness. It was food that reminded people that love does not always wear a feast. It sometimes comes in the quiet sound of a skillet and a full belly. Sorghum syrup biscuits with milk were the kind of dinner that showed how families found sweetness even in struggle. Sorghum syrup, cheaper than sugar, was kept in jars that seemed to last forever, poured generously over hot biscuits fresh from the oven. My grandmother baked the biscuits with flour and lard, ingredients that could be stretched and shared across multiple meals. Once the biscuits were ready, she split them open, drizzled them with syrup, and served them with cold milk poured into glasses. It was simple but filling, providing enough energy for tired workers and growing children. The sweetness of the syrup turned plain flour biscuits into something that felt like a treat, even if it was just supper. In the 1960s, this kind of meal reminded families that comfort did not always need meat or elaborate dishes. It was about making do with what was on hand and finding joy in it. Sorghum syrup biscuits with milk were a reminder that sweetness could soften the edge of hardship.
For 15, ham hock and lima beans, a 2-pound bag of dried baby limas on the kitchen table in 1946 Mobile, soaked overnight with a teaspoon of baking soda. The cook drained them, rinsed them, dropped them into a Dutch oven with a smoked ham hock the butcher gave her free. She added a yellow onion stuck with 3 cloves, a bay leaf, enough water to cover by 2 inches. The pot simmered 4 hours while she ironed shirts. The hock came out. She stripped the meat, stirred it back in, salt last so the beans stayed tender. She served it over white rice with a wedge of corn pone and a slice of raw onion. The dish fed 5 for 9 cents. That was the whole bill. It ran the family from Wednesday to Friday, and any week the paycheck came up short. Your grandmother kept the recipe in her head the way her ancestors had since the cotton fields. Number 23, rice and gravy. In the low country of South Carolina and the Creole kitchens of Louisiana, rice was not a side dish. It was the foundation. Leftover rice went back into the pot the next evening with a ladle of brown gravy saved from the night before. Gravy from smothered pork chops. Gravy from stewed chicken necks. Gravy from pan drippings collected in a jar by the stove. You heated it until the rice absorbed every drop and each grain was coated in something rich and dark. In the Gula communities of the Sea Islands, rice and gravy for supper was so traditional that not having it felt wrong. The rice was always there because no one in a Gula kitchen ever cooked less than a full pot. A 5-pound bag of rice cost 49 cents in 1955 and lasted 2 weeks. The gravy was free because it had already been paid for with yesterday's supper. Nothing wasted, nothing thrown away. Number 11, roast leg of lamb. Black preachers drew a direct line from the Israelites, marking their doors with lamb's blood, to black families surviving slavery and Jim Crow. If you sat in that pew, you understood. Easter lamb was not just dinner. It was theology you could taste on your own plate. In rural southern communities through the mid-20th century, many black families kept small flocks of sheep. Edna Lewis, born in Freetown, Virginia, a farming community founded by freed slaves after the Civil War, described spring sheep shearing as a community event. The lamb would be roasted whole or as a leg for Easter Sunday. A whole leg of lamb averaged $4.50 per pound in 2000. It now runs $9 to $12, putting a 7-pound leg at $63 to $84. United States lamb production has declined roughly 85% since the 1940s, from over 56 million sheep to under 5 million. As black families urbanized and moved north, access to fresh lamb declined. Ham took over as the default Easter meat. The lamb and its sermon disappeared together.
Chitlin dressing appeared on tables when traditional stuffing felt too expensive, turning what others discarded into something deeply satisfying. Cleaned thoroughly over hours, chitlins were chopped fine and mixed with cornbread crumbles, celery, onions, sage, and chicken broth stretched as far as possible. The mixture baked until golden on top while staying moist inside, creating dressing that carried intense flavor and connected families to ancestral cooking traditions. Black mothers prepared chitlins as acts of both economy and heritage, knowing their grandmothers had done the same during harder times. The smell was unmistakable, but for those raised with it, chitlin dressing meant Thanksgiving in ways plain bread stuffing never could. A single batch cost less than $3, yet fed the entire gathering. Young people might have initially resisted, but after that first bite, most came back for seconds. Chitlin dressing taught lessons about respecting traditions.
Number 4, fried catfish. Pulled cheap or free from the muddy bottoms of southern rivers, this fish fed many a family that could not afford to buy meat. Catfish were bottom feeders that nobody had to pay for if you owned a line and a riverbank, which made them a poor man's protein across the whole South. The cook cleaned the fish, rolled the pieces in seasoned cornmeal, and slid them into a skillet of hot grease, where the meal coating crisped into a craggy golden crust while the flesh inside steamed up tender and flaky. Cornmeal was the key, cheap and always on hand, and it fried up crunchier than flour ever could. A squeeze of hot sauce, a piece of cornbread, or a few hush puppies fried in the same grease, and supper was on the table. Friday night fish fries grew up around this dish, the smell of it carrying down the block. Crisp outside, sweet and flaky within, caught for nothing and fried to gold. A river supper that asked only for a line and a hot skillet. Number 15, country-style steak smothered in onion gravy. Cube steak or round steak, pounded flat, seasoned, dredged in flour, and browned in a cast iron skillet. Then sliced onions went in, a cup of water, and the lid came down. 2 hours later, the steak was tender enough to pull apart with a fork, swimming in thick brown onion gravy that tasted like it had been building all week. Across the Carolinas, Georgia, and Alabama, this was the dinner that appeared when there was not enough money for a roast. The cut was cheap, and the technique did all the work. Served with mashed potatoes and a spoonful of gravy over everything, it felt like a bigger meal than it was. Country-style steak disappeared when cube steak stopped appearing in the meat case at smaller stores. The chains consolidated their cuts, and this one did not survive. Number 16, neck bones and black-eyed peas. Black-eyed peas carry more superstition than any other bean in the southern pantry. Eating them on New Year's Day was supposed to bring luck for the rest of the year, and most families took that seriously enough to make sure the pot was full by noon on January 1st. But black-eyed peas with neck bones was not a once-a-year occasion. It showed up whenever the dried peas were on hand and the budget was thin, which was most weeks. The peas cooked faster than pintos or limas, breaking down in about an hour into a thick, starchy pot that clung to the rice underneath. The neck bones gave them a depth that salt alone could never reach. Families in Georgia and the Carolinas grew black-eyed peas in the garden between the corn rows because the plants fixed nitrogen in the soil and helped the corn grow taller. The food fed the family and the garden fed itself. That was the kind of efficiency that did not come from a textbook. It came from people who had been watching dirt and weather for generations.
Shepherd's pie with creamed corn was one of those dinners that brought everyone to the table just by existing. Families layered it differently depending on what they had, but the pattern was always roughly the same. A savory meat base, a layer of creamed corn, and a cloud of mashed potatoes spread across the top like a soft, warm blanket. It baked into a bubbling, golden-topped dish that felt like comfort scooped straight from the oven. The creamed corn added sweetness and richness that balanced the meat perfectly, turning each bite into a blend of textures and flavors that tasted far more complicated than it really was. Kids loved digging through the layers, Adults loved how far it could stretch when money was tight, and everyone loved how one pan could feed an entire family without anyone feeling shortchanged. It was a dish shaped by personality, by whatever seasonings happened to be nearby, by the quiet creativity of home cooking. Even now, people crave it because it represents a whole world of warmth, routine, and togetherness tucked beneath a layer of mashed potatoes. Cowfoot soup was once considered a true stick-to-your-ribs dinner in African American kitchens, especially during lean years. Made by simmering cow feet slowly for hours, it produced a gelatin-rich broth that thickened naturally. Vegetables like carrots, onions, and potatoes were added to round it out, but the real heart of the dish was the deep, silky broth that clung to every spoonful. Families believed it gave strength and lasting fullness, which mattered when work was hard and meals were scarce. The dish required patience, since the feet had to cook down until tender, but the result was both nourishing and comforting. It carried a flavor unlike anything else, with a richness that no canned soup could match. Served with bread or rice, cowfoot soup fed whole families for pennies. Though it has largely disappeared from modern tables, it once represented resilience, thrift, and a belief in food's power to sustain more than just the body. Sweet potato biscuits were soft, golden clouds of comfort baked right into the heart of wartime kitchens. When sugar was scarce, families leaned on the natural sweetness of homegrown sweet potatoes. Mashed and mixed into biscuit dough, they baked up tender and fragrant, filling the house with the smell of cinnamon, smoke, and love. They were served with butter if you had it, syrup if you were lucky, or just warm from the oven if not. Each bite carried a quiet message. Life might be hard, but there was still room for sweetness. These biscuits graced church suppers, family gatherings, and small kitchen tables alike. They were food for the soul, the kind of treat that reminded families that hope was something you could taste. The golden crust flaked beneath the fingertips, and the soft center melted on the tongue like memory. Grandmothers often baked them on Sundays, saving one pan for the next morning's breakfast. Even the leftovers, if any, were treasures wrapped in cloth. They told a story of endurance sweetened by faith, of women who made miracles with nothing more than flour, fire, and heart. In those biscuits lived the taste of love passed down through generations. This was not your average stew. Son of a Gun stew was a chuckwagon classic, made from every edible part of a calf: heart, liver, marrow, tongue, and sometimes even the brain if it had not gone to the dogs first. Cowboys did not waste a single bite, and the trail cook was expected to know how to turn those scraps into something halfway decent. The stew simmered in cast iron over open flame, thickened with flour or old coffee grounds, and flavored with salt if you were lucky enough to have it. A pot of Son of a Gun was more than food. It was a reminder that survival meant using everything you had, no matter how it looked or smelled going in. It filled you up, kept your strength, and tasted better than it had any right to after riding a horse all day. The name? That came from the fact that nobody ever wanted to admit what was actually in it. This was food for hard men under hard skies, and it stuck to your bones like nothing else. Turkey wing pot roast turned thrift into triumph, stretching a few wings into a meal that could feed many. Grandma browned them first, the skin crisping under the heat before she laid them into the pan with carrots, onions, and potatoes. A little water, a pinch of spice, and time did the rest. Hours later, the kitchen smelled like heaven, rich, savory, and full of promise. The meat fell from the bone with the gentlest touch, the gravy glistening across the vegetables. It was not expensive, but it was everything a meal should be: filling, flavorful, and full of care. Families gathered, hungry and happy, their plates warm and their spirits lifted. Turkey wing pot roast was proof that even the least celebrated parts could shine when cooked with love. It was patience turned into flavor, comfort baked into tradition, and every bite whispered that nothing made by hand was ever humble. Pumpkin stew with onions was the kind of dish that proved homegrown vegetables could anchor a meal. Pumpkins were easy to plant, easy to store, and yielded enough flesh to keep a family fed for weeks. My grandmother peeled chunks of pumpkin, cooked them down with onions, and let the pot simmer until it turned thick and savory. the sweetness of the pumpkin mixed with the sharpness of onion, creating a balance that felt hearty and satisfying. Sometimes she added a little pepper or a leftover bone for extra flavor, but even plain, the stew was filling. Served with bread or cornbread, it was enough to feed a household without meat or costly ingredients. In the 1960s, pumpkins were not just for pies or holidays, they were staples, pulled from backyard gardens and turned into supper. The stew carried warmth, thrift, and creativity in every spoonful. Pumpkin stew with onions showed that survival did not mean going without taste, only learning to love what the land gave freely.
Number 22, pig feet jelly with hot vinegar. A glass mason jar on the back porch shelf in 1945 Charleston, packed with split pig feet, water, salt, bay leaf, and 3 cloves of garlic. She simmered the feet for 6 hours. The meat fell off. The broth turned the color of weak tea. She strained it, pressed the meat into the jar, let the natural collagen do the work. By morning, the whole thing had set into a pale amber jelly. She sliced it cold for supper, served it with hot pepper vinegar in a thin saucer, a stack of saltine crackers on the side. A man came in from the field, ate half the jar, asked for more. The dish needed no icebox in winter. Your grandmother could feed a working man on what the white grocer threw away. That was the genius of her Depression kitchen. You wouldn't think a foot could become supper, but it could. Number 16, hot water cornbread. Here's how simple food gets. Cornmeal, boiling water, a pinch of salt. That was it. You pour boiling water over cornmeal and stirred until it formed a thick dough, then shaped it into patties with your hands and dropped them into hot grease. They fried until golden and crispy on the outside, soft and dense on the inside. The boiling water was the whole secret. It cooked the cornmeal before it hit the skillet, making the dough hold together without eggs or milk or flour. Enslaved people made hot water cornbread because they were only given cornmeal and had to find a way. Their grandchildren still made it in the 1950s for the same reason. It was cheap, it was filling, and it required nothing a poor family did not already have. A 5-pound bag of cornmeal cost 29 cents and made hot water cornbread for 2 weeks. That bag was the most important item in a Black Southern pantry. Number 14, banana pudding. The Easter banana pudding that has disappeared is the from scratch version. Real egg custard cooked on the stovetop, layered with fresh bananas and vanilla wafers, topped with meringue brown golden in the oven. Making it took 90 minutes. The instant pudding mixed with Cool Whip version takes 15, an 83% reduction in labor that changed the dish forever. At every Black church Easter potluck, banana pudding arrived in the same Pyrex dish that had served 3 generations. You knew whose was whose, because in a community where everything was shared, that recipe was the one secret nobody gave up. The real custard version required skill, cooking the eggs to exactly the right temperature without scrambling them, achieving the right thickness, timing the meringue, 6 to 8 eggs for the custard and meringue, 1 quart of whole milk, about 6 bananas. The dish came to church in the morning. It sat on a table with 20 other dishes from 20 other women, and you knew exactly which one to reach for first. The instant version killed the skill, but it also killed your pride in making it. Here's something that does not get said enough. These recipes did not just survive the South, they survived a journey. Between 1915 and 1970, over 7 million Black Americans left the rural South for cities in the North, Midwest, and West. They packed what they could carry: clothes, photographs, and recipes, mostly unwritten, held entirely in the memory of the women who made them. Your grandmother in Mississippi who braised oxtails for 6 hours did not write that down. Her daughter watched. Her granddaughter watched the daughter. The recipe traveled from Greenwood to Chicago and a suitcase that held no paper. When that family set an Easter table in Bronzeville, the food was identical to what they had left behind. Same ham hock in the greens, same cornbread in the same cast iron skillet, same caramel cake with the icing beaten by hand. That was the point. The table was the last piece of home that could not be taken. But each generation that passed without writing those recipes down lost a little more, and now your family is running out of grandmothers who remember.
Fried chicken wings bought in bulk became the affordable alternative to whole birds, giving families the crispy, golden poultry that made Thanksgiving feel festive without emptying wallets. Chicken wings sold for 30 cents per pound in the 1970s, making them one of the most economical cuts available, especially when purchased in 10-pound bags from discount grocers. Black mothers would season them overnight with paprika, garlic powder, onion powder, and black pepper, then fry them in batches until the skin shattered with each bite. The meat stayed juicy, while the coating turned crispy and flavorful, creating that perfect contrast that made fried chicken legendary in Black cooking traditions. Unlike turkey or whole chickens, wings fried quickly and could be prepared by multiple cooks simultaneously, making them practical for large gatherings. Children loved eating with their hands, while adults appreciated how wings stretched the poultry budget without sacrificing flavor.
Number 18, Hoppin' John. Born in the low-country rice fields, this one-pot supper carried West Africa straight to the southern table. It came from the Gullah Geechee people of coastal South Carolina, descendants of enslaved Africans who paired the rice they knew how to grow with black-eyed peas, a legume with deep African roots. Food historians trace it back to Tibo Niebe, a Senegalese rice and bean dish, and to wake from Ghana. The cooking was plain and forgiving. Black-eyed peas simmered with a piece of smoked pork until soft. Then rice went into the same pot to cook in that seasoned liquid until the grains drank it all up. One pot, 2 cheap staples, and a scrap of pork was enough to feed everyone at the table. By New Year's, the dish carried meaning too, the peas standing for coins and good luck in the year ahead. Filling, frugal, and rooted in history older than the South itself. Number 8, smothered guinea hen. Guinea fowl were kept in yards across the rural Black South, prized because they ate ticks and insects and required almost no care. When one was culled for Sunday dinner, it was cut into pieces and treated like chicken, but cooked longer. The meat was leaner and gamier, with a flavor closer to pheasant than to anything from the grocery store. Browned in a skillet, then smothered in onions and broth with the lid sealed for 2.5 hours. The slow cooking softened the tougher breast meat and built a gravy from the drippings. Served with rice and greens, guinea hens were yard birds in the truest sense, and when families stopped keeping them, the dish vanished with the flock. Number 25, neck bones and okra. Okra grew wild in southern gardens every summer, shooting up so fast that a missed day of picking meant woody, tough pods. But young okra, sliced thin and dropped into a pot of neck bones that had been going since morning, did something no other vegetable could. It thickened the broth on its own. The natural mucilage turned the pot liquor heavy and silky without a pinch of flour. Families across Alabama and the Mississippi Delta cooked this from June straight through September, when okra came in faster than anyone could use it fresh. The bones gave the pot its depth. The okra gave it body. Some threw in a handful of garden tomatoes to cut the thickness. Others left it alone, ladled over rice in a wide bowl. It was not gumbo. It was older than gumbo, and it asked for less.
Baked ham with pineapple rings was the kind of sweet, savory centerpiece that made Sundays feel like holidays, even when nothing special was happening. Families would take a modest cut of ham, stud it with cloves, and layer pineapple rings on top, letting the juice drip down the sides as it baked until the whole kitchen smelled warm and sticky. The ham itself was simple and affordable, but the pineapple transformed it, turning an ordinary meal into something festive and bright. Watching the fruit caramelize in the oven felt like watching a tradition unfold, one that had been passed through so many hands that it no longer belonged to anyone in particular. Kids loved the sweetness, adults loved the nostalgia, and everyone loved the way the table suddenly felt fuller with that ham sitting in the center. Slices were served thick or thin, usually with mashed potatoes or bread on the side, soaking up all the extra glaze. Even now, people remember that taste because it felt like an occasion, something that meant family was gathered and everything was calm. It was a dish that stretched across decades, bringing people back to simpler times every time it reappeared. Baked coons or raccoon meat was once a common rural dish in African American communities where hunting remained a necessity. Raccoon was skinned, cleaned, and baked slowly with onions, peppers, and spices until tender. Sometimes the meat was stewed into gravy and poured over rice or potatoes, turning wild game into family supper. It was an accessible source of protein for households that could not afford store-bought meat, and hunters took pride in bringing it home. The flavor was gamey but savory, and when seasoned well, it was remembered as comforting and hearty. Children may have been squeamish about it, but for many families it was simply another part of survival. As supermarkets grew and hunting declined, baked raccoon disappeared from most dinner tables. Today it is nearly forgotten, but it once represented self-reliance, cultural tradition, and the ability to turn even the most unconventional meat into nourishment. Baked coons carried memory, heritage, and pride that still deserve recognition. Cabbage and potatoes with fatback was the kind of dinner that came from both patience and pride. It started with simple ingredients, just a head of cabbage, a few potatoes, and a piece of salted pork. But it ended up tasting like something far grander. The fatback sizzled first in the pan, releasing its smoky aroma that filled the house and made stomachs growl. Then came the cabbage and potatoes, frying and steaming together until tender and glistening. The salty richness from the pork flavored every bite, turning two humble vegetables into a full meal. It was a one-pan supper that needed no extras, no fancy seasoning, just time and care. Families cooked it when payday was still far away, yet it always brought a sense of comfort. This was food that worked hard to remind people they were still home, still together, and still able to make something beautiful from what little they had. Beans were always part of the story, but when you had molasses and bear grease, the story changed. This dish started in open ovens or cast iron pots that sat on hearthstones. Dry beans, navy, kidney, or pintos were soaked, boiled, and then mixed with thick, dark molasses. That alone was a meal. But what made it unforgettable was the drizzle of bear grease poured on top just before serving. Bear grease was liquid gold. Rendered slowly from bear fat over a fire, it had a deep, smoky richness that made even the plainest dish feel like celebration. You did not always have it, but when you did, you used every drop. The beans baked slowly, the molasses caramelized, and the bear grease brought it all together like the last note in a song. This was not something you served to guests. It was something you served to family, people who knew what hunger meant. The beans filled your belly, the sweetness lifted your mood, and the fat kept you going through the coldest nights. It was the kind of food that made you feel like maybe, just maybe, you would make it through the winter after all. Okra gumbo with chicken and sausage was a pot of history simmered low and slow. The okra thickened the broth until it glistened, holding the flavors of smoked sausage, tender chicken, and seasoned stock. Each spoonful was a journey, layers of spice and comfort meeting in the middle. Families stirred that gumbo for hours, wooden spoons tracing generations into the pot. When poured over white rice, it became more than dinner. It was identity, culture, and care in one bowl. The smell filled the house with warmth, the kind that made strangers feel like kin. Every bite carried rhythm and resilience, a melody made edible. Gumbo was never just food, it was legacy, patience, and pride boiled together. It reminded people who they were, where they came from, and how love could turn hardship into flavor. The roux browned slow, the okra softened, and the sausage lent its smoke until everything sang in harmony. In each bowl lived stories of migration, survival, and celebration, tied together by spice and soul. Stewed okra with cornmeal dumplings was a dish that blended frugality with comfort in a way that stuck with families for decades. Okra, often grown in backyard gardens, went into a simmering pot with onions, tomatoes, and broth until it softened into a thick stew. My grandmother would mix simple cornmeal batter, drop spoonfuls into the bubbling pot, and let the dumplings cook until they puffed into tender bites. The texture of the okra thickened the stew naturally, giving it body without needing flour or cream. Each bowl carried the flavor of the garden, earthy and sustaining, with dumplings that filled the stomachs of tired workers. It was food that came straight from the soil and stretched further than its ingredients suggested. Children grew up eating this dish as a matter of routine, yet it became part of the rhythm of survival. In the 1960s, stewed okra with cornmeal dumplings was a staple that represented both thrift and ingenuity, turning humble vegetables and flour into something worthy of pride at the dinner table.
Number 21, cornmeal mush with skim milk gravy, a cast iron skillet on a coal stove in 1943 Detroit. A cup of yellow cornmeal whisked into 3 cups of boiling salted water. The cook stirred it for 20 minutes. It pulled away from the sides of the pan in one piece. Glossy and yellow as a winter sun, she poured it into a loaf tin, let it set firm overnight on the cold side of the porch. Morning came. She sliced it 1/2 inch thick, fried each piece in a teaspoon of bacon grease, topped it with skim milk gravy. The supper cost 6 cents and fed 3. The mill on Hastings Street ground the meal. The milkman delivered the skim free because nobody wanted it. Every black household in your block kept a coffee can of bacon grease on the stove, the kitchen heart of your neighborhood. By 1972, both were gone. Number 19, fried green tomatoes. When the garden produced more tomatoes than a family could eat and frost was coming, mothers picked them green and sliced them thick. Each slice was dredged in cornmeal and fried in bacon grease until crispy on the outside and soft on the inside. The tartness of the green tomato cut through the richness of the grease, and the cornmeal crust shattered when you bit through it. A plate of fried green tomatoes with cornbread cost nothing because the tomatoes came from the yard and the cornmeal was already in the cupboard. Black families across Alabama, Mississippi, and the Carolinas ate this through late summer and early fall, 3 or 4 nights a week during tomato season. Nobody photographed it. Nobody wrote it down. The garden's tomatoes were not ripe, supper needed to happen, and the skillet was already hot. That was the whole decision. Number 17, sweet potato pie. During Jim Crow, white America dismissed this pie as poor man's food. The reason was simple and ugly. Black people ate it, so black families doubled down. They made it the pride of every Easter table, turned stigma into defiance, one slice at a time. The original sweet potato pie was nothing like what you would find in any store today. Enslaved people made crustless versions, cooked directly in the hearth using molasses and whatever spices they could get. No pie pan, no rolling pin, no flour for crust. After emancipation, when black cooks gained access to their own equipment, the crusted pie emerged. The sweet potato itself connected back to West Africa. Enslaved people recognized it as a cousin of the yam, a staple of the homeland they had been stolen from. 3,000 miles and a lifetime of suffering away from home, this one vegetable tasted like your ancestors' memory of freedom. Abby Fisher published a sweet potato pie recipe in her 1881 cookbook, possibly the first printed recipe of its kind by an African-American author. She was illiterate. The recipe lived in her hands before it ever lived on a page.
Collard greens cooked with smoked turkey tails instead of ham hocks provided the traditional side dish at a fraction of the cost, turning a bag of greens into nourishment that carried flavor and cultural meaning. Turkey tails, often overlooked and heavily discounted at butcher counters, contained enough fat and smokiness to season an entire pot for under $2. Black mothers would buy 3 or 4 pounds of fresh collards from produce stands where vegetables stayed affordable. The greens were washed repeatedly until no grit remained, then chopped and added to pots where turkey tails had been simmering with onions and vinegar. Hours of slow cooking broke down the greens until they turned silky, while pot liquor became broth so flavorful that people sipped it from cups. This wasn't just a side dish, but vitamin-rich vegetables that provided essential nutrients. Families served collards alongside everything else, understanding that greens represented prosperity.
Number 22, smothered potatoes and onions. If there were potatoes in the bin and an onion on the counter, supper was already settled. Smothering was one of the great techniques of the Southern kitchen, a slow braise that turned the plain ingredients into something soft and savory. The cook sliced potatoes and onions thin, laid them in a heavy skillet with a spoon of bacon grease, and let them cook down low and slow with the lid on. The steam trapped under that lid did the work, melting the onions into the potatoes until the whole thing went tender and sweet. Toward the end, the lid came off so the bottom layer could brown and form that prized golden crust against the iron. A little salt, a little black pepper, and maybe a splash of water to keep it from sticking was all it took. Served with a piece of cornbread, it made a full plate without a scrap of meat. Pure comfort built from 2 of the cheapest things in the house. Number 24, stewed ox tongue. The tongue came from the butcher wrapped in brown paper, heavy and muscular, and it went straight into a pot of boiling water with onion, bay leaves, and black peppercorns. 3 hours later, the outer skin peeled off in one sheet, revealing pale, tender meat underneath. Sliced thick and laid into a gravy of tomatoes, garlic, and thyme, the tongue simmered for another hour until the slices could be cut with a fork. The texture was unlike any other beef on the table, dense, smooth, almost creamy. In black kitchens across the rural South, tongue was a Sunday dish that required no apology and no explanation. The older women served it with pride. The children ate it without knowing what it was until they were old enough to ask. When supermarkets replaced butcher counters and customers stopped requesting whole organs, the tongue disappeared from the case and from the table at the same time. Number 12, neck bone and rutabaga stew. Rutabagas are ugly. They look like oversized turnips with waxy purple skin, and most people walking through a grocery store today would not know what to do with one. But Depression-era Black families knew. You peeled them, cubed them, and put them in the pot with neck bones. They cooked down slower than potatoes, held their shape longer, and had a slightly bitter, earthy flavor that stood up to the richness of the pork. Rutabaga stew was a cold weather meal in the rural South, especially in the hill country of northern Alabama and North Mississippi, where rutabagas grew well in rocky soil. This is one of the meals on this list that genuinely faded. Younger generations did not learn to cook with rutabagas because they did not grow up seeing them in the kitchen.
Fried pork chops with apples was the kind of dinner that felt hearty and homelike even when money was tight. The pork chops were coated lightly or simply seasoned, then fried until golden brown, sending up smells that wrapped themselves around the walls and furniture. Apples were sliced thin and cooked down until they softened into a warm, sweet topping that balanced the savory richness of the meat. It was a pairing that felt natural, almost inevitable, like something families had been making long before recipes were written down. Adults loved how filling it was. Kids loved the sweetness of the apples, and everyone loved how it turned an ordinary night into something comforting. It was the type of dish you remembered without even trying to remember it. It filled the house, filled the plate, and filled the moment with a kind of steady warmth only the 1960s kitchen could produce. Molasses and butter over rice may sound like dessert, but for many African American families, it was a real supper when meat was out of reach. A pot of rice was boiled, then topped with butter and a drizzle of dark molasses, creating a dish that was sweet, rich, and comforting. Children loved it because of the sweetness, while parents valued its ability to fill empty stomachs quickly and cheaply. Rice stretched across multiple meals, and molasses was one of the most affordable sweeteners available at the time. Together, they created a plate that was both simple and satisfying. This dish carried echoes of resourcefulness from the Depression era, reminding families that food did not need to be complicated to be memorable. It was eaten hot from the stove, often as a stand-in for full dinner when money was gone. Though rarely made today, molasses and butter over rice was once a staple that brought warmth, sweetness, and resilience into households across the South. Rabbit cowpea soup simmered like a prayer whispered over a fire. The pot would start with water, a scoop of dried field peas, and maybe a scrap of salted meat if the week had been kind. Onions and garlic joined in, releasing their scent as the broth thickened into something golden and strong. The cowpeas, small and sturdy, softened slowly, their flavor deepening with every hour. This wasn't fast food, it was patient food, built on rhythm and time. Families made it during harvest, when work was hard and hands needed warmth. It was ladled into tin bowls and passed around without ceremony, each bite grounding you in gratitude. Sometimes cornbread floated on top like an offering, soaking up the last drops of broth. The soup tasted of earth and labor, of simple things done well. Cowpea soup was both meal and memory, tying together generations who had learned how to make plenty out of little. It was food for body and spirit alike, humble but whole, strong but soothing. Even now, its scent carries the same promise, that comfort comes from what you give, not what you have. Succotash was one of the earliest examples of how settlers and Native communities crossed paths at the dinner table. Originally a Native American staple, it was a mix of beans, squash, and corn. On the frontier, it got a twist. People started adding dried venison or jerky, torn into strips and boiled until soft, to give it weight. It was made in cast iron, over fire, with whatever vegetables you had lying around or growing wild nearby. If there was fat, it came from pork grease or marrow bones. If there was seasoning, it was usually just salt and thyme. Everything went into the pan, and you let it bubble until the flavors blended and the scent filled the room. It was a one-pot meal with no frills, but a lot of heart. You spooned it into bowls or ate it right from the pot. It was shared, passed around, and eaten in silence by people who had worked all day and would work all night. It was more than survival food. It was an offering, a reminder that even strangers had something to teach each other about making the most out of very little. Baked macaroni and tomato casserole was a dish of invention, born in kitchens that never wasted a thing. Leftover noodles met tomato sauce, cheese, and a little milk to stretch it just enough to feed everyone. The casserole baked until bubbling, the top crisp and browned. It was the comfort of macaroni mixed with the tang of tomatoes, a meal that felt like home even when times were lean. Each bite balanced warmth and nostalgia, reminding families that flavor could come from the simplest pantry. Children loved the gooey center. Parents loved how far it went. It was thrift turned into tenderness, a little miracle baked in Pyrex. Baked macaroni and tomato casserole carried quiet triumph, the kind only those who made much from little could truly understand. The cheese pulled soft and golden as spoons dipped in, serving both hunger and history. It was living proof that love, not luxury, made the best meals. Every forkful carried the sound of laughter from crowded tables, the hum of radio music, and the strength of hands that kept families fed through every season. Fried green tomatoes with grits was a cheap Southern classic that carried both tradition and thrift in every bite. Unripe tomatoes, plucked before they spoiled, were sliced, dredged in cornmeal, and fried until golden in a skillet of hot oil or bacon fat. My grandmother paired them with bowls of creamy grits, the cornmeal base that stretched across countless households for pennies. The tomatoes were tangy and crisp, the grits soft and warm, creating a contrast that satisfied both hunger and taste. It was food that came straight from the garden and pantry, without needing costly additions. Families ate it often in the summer when tomatoes grew in abundance, but it found its way to the table year-round. The combination of fried green tomatoes with grits represented resilience, resourcefulness, and the comfort of tradition. In the 1960s, this meal stood as proof that good food did not depend on wealth, but on knowing how to use what you had wisely.
Number 25, salt pork and cabbage pot, a blue speckled enamel pot on a wood range in 1943 Birmingham, 3/4 full of water, 1 head of cabbage chopped rough, a piece of salt pork the size of a child's fist. The cook cut the rind into a cross so the fat would render slow. By the time the cabbage went limp, the pork had given up enough grease to coat every leaf. The kitchen smelled the vinegar from the porch jar she kept by the door. 4 ingredients, 1 fire, a wooden spoon worn smooth from 20 years of use. None of it was banned by law. The supermarket just stopped stocking the rind by 1972. She served it with a wedge of corn pone and a glass of cold buttermilk on the side. Your grandmother knew the dish by smell. Her grandmother had cooked it through the Depression. You have never tasted it. Your kitchen does not even keep the pot anymore. Number 12, black-eyed peas and ham hock. According to food historians, black-eyed peas were not just for New Year's luck. They were a Wednesday night lifeline. A bag of dried black-eyed peas simmered with a ham hock, an onion, and a can of diced tomatoes until everything melted into a thick, smoky stew. The ham hock was the cheapest cut at the butcher counter, often less than 15 cents a pound in the early 1950s. It existed for one purpose, to give flavor to beans, and it did that job better than anything else in the store. A single pot fed a family of 6 for 2 days. Served over rice, it stretched even further. Black families in Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia bought enough dried peas and ham hocks on the first of the month to last until the next check came. This was not cuisine, this was engineering. Number 19, tea cakes. Before there were Cadbury, eggs, and Peeps, Black children on Easter morning found baskets filled with their grandmother's tea cakes, lightly sweet cookies made from butter, sugar, flour, eggs, and vanilla. A single batch yielded 3 to 4 dozen. The total ingredient cost during the Depression was under $1. Tea cakes were created by enslaved cooks trying to replicate the English tea cakes they baked for plantation owners. After emancipation, the recipe became a staple in your family's kitchen. For Easter, grandmothers made large batches and filled children's baskets with them instead of store-bought candy. The cookies had a character you could not find in any store. Lightly crisp on the outside, cake-like crumb inside, sweetness so subtle it whispered instead of shouted. During the Great Migration, families carried the recipe north, but in the cities, tea cakes had to compete with commercially available Easter candy. By the 1980s and 1990s, most families had stopped making them. Author Elbert Mackey wrote an entire book dedicated to preserving tea cake stories, recognizing the tradition was disappearing. When the grandmothers died, the baskets went empty.
Potato salad stretched with extra eggs and mayonnaise became the cold side dish that fed crowds for minimal cost, transforming basic potatoes into creamy satisfaction. Black mothers boiled potatoes by the 5-pound bag, timing them carefully so they'd be firm enough to dice without turning to mush, then combined them with hard-boiled eggs that provided protein. The ratio was crucial. Enough eggs to make the salad filling, but not so many that it tasted only of eggs, with mayonnaise binding everything together. Mustard added tang, while finely diced celery and onions provided crunch and flavor dimension. The true economical genius came from using potatoes as filler, allowing a single dozen eggs to feed 20 people when stretched with enough starch. Some families added sweet pickle relish for both flavor and the satisfaction of having extras in their salad. The salad chilled overnight, making it perfect for gatherings where oven space was limited and make-ahead dishes were essential.
Number 24, fried bologna. Long before it became a punchline, this was an honest meal that kept many families going. During the Depression, bologna was often the only meat a household could afford, and it was frequently the only meat on hand. Cooks would slice it thick, cut little slits around the edge so it would not dome up in the pan, and fry it in a hot skillet until the edges curled and browned. That crisp ring around the outside was the whole reward. Pressed between two slices of light bread with a smear of mustard, it became a sandwich that a child could carry to school or a worker could fold into a lunch pail. Sometimes it went over rice with a little gravy made from the drippings. Cheap, fast, and filling, it stretched a few cents into a real plate of food, a humble meal that asked for nothing and gave back plenty. Number 7, pot-roasted whole duck. A whole duck was a rare thing on most Black Sunday tables, but in Louisiana and parts of the Mississippi Delta and along the Gulf Coast, duck was available to families who hunted. Wild mallards or farm-raised ducks were cleaned and rubbed with salt, pepper, garlic, and cayenne, then placed breast down in a heavy covered pot with onions, celery, and just enough water to keep the bottom from scorching. The duck roasted at low heat for 3 to 4 hours. The fat rendered slowly, basting the bird from the inside out until the skin turned dark and crisp and the meat pulled apart with no resistance. The pot drippings were strained and became a gravy richer than anything pork or chicken could produce. Duck fat carries a depth of flavor that sits between butter and bacon, and a whole afternoon of slow rendering concentrated it into something extraordinary. Served with dirty rice and mustard greens, a pot-roasted duck fed a family of 6 from a single bird. The dish belonged to a specific geography and a specific set of skills. You had to know how to hunt, how to clean the bird, how to manage the heat so the fat rendered without burning. These were skills passed from father to son in families that lived close to water and marshland. When those families moved to cities, the ducks stayed behind. Grocery stores carried no substitute. A farm-raised duck today costs more than most families would spend on a weeknight roast. The wild ones require a license and a morning in the blind that the modern work schedule does not accommodate. The pot-roasted duck was a meal built on access, and when the access closed, the meal closed with it. What connects every meal on this list is not a recipe or a region. It is a relationship to time that no longer exists. These dinners assume someone would be home all day, someone who could start a fire at dawn and tend it through the afternoon, someone whose labor was not counted in wages, but measured in plates filled and mouths fed. That person was almost always a woman, and the system that allowed her to spend a full Sunday at the stove depended on a world where Sunday itself was sacred. Not a shopping day, not a work day, a day set aside for the kitchen, the church, and the table. When Sunday became just another day, the slow-cooked dinner became a luxury nobody could afford. Number 10, neck bones and yellow squash. Yellow squash came in fast during the summer months, faster than most families could eat it. The vines produced so heavily that neighbors left grocery bags of squash on each other's porches without asking permission, sliced into thick rounds and dropped into a pot of simmering neck bones. The squash went translucent and silky within 20 minutes. It soaked up pork broth and turned into something richer than squash had any right to be on its own. This was a July and August meal across the Deep South, when the garden was given more than the kitchen could handle, and the heat outside made standing over the stove feel like a sentence. One pot, low flame, everything in together. The squash dissolved into the broth and thickened it from the inside, and the bones gave the whole pot a savory anchor that plain squash could never carry alone.
Breaded veal patties were once a diner favorite that found steady homes in 1960s kitchens, served with gravy and mashed potatoes like something straight off a lunch counter menu. Families bought them because they were inexpensive, easy to cook, and tasted tender once fried and covered in gravy. The breading gave them a crisp exterior, while the inside stayed soft and mild, making them a hit with children who had not yet learned to love stronger flavors. The dish felt comforting, reliable, and just hearty enough to end a long day right. Even though they appear less often today, many people still crave that nostalgic taste because it reminds them of childhood dinners served hot on plates that clattered slightly when set on the table. There was something reassuring about the whole routine, from hearing the sizzle of the patties in the pan to watching the gravy bubble as it thickened. It was a kind of dinner that did not require fuss or stress, only a warm pan, a steady hand, and the quiet instinct of someone who cooked from memory instead of recipes. Those veal patties were proof that simple food could feel like a feast when shared at a table filled with familiar voices and everyday conversation. Pickled pig's feet with crackers may sound like a snack today, but in the 1950s it was often eaten as a full dinner plate in African American households. The feet were simmered, then packed in vinegar brine until tender and tangy. Served cold with a stack of crackers, they offered protein, fat, and flavor at almost no cost. Families valued them because they made use of parts of the hog that others discarded, turning waste into sustenance. The vinegar gave the dish a sharpness that cut through the richness, making it both refreshing and hearty. Children might wrinkle their noses, but many adults grew up seeing it as a delicacy tied to memory and survival. This dish reflected the cultural habit of using every part of the animal, honoring thrift and tradition. Though it has nearly vanished outside of specialty shops, pickled pig's feet with crackers once carried pride, practicality, and a unique taste that is rarely experienced today. Turnip greens and rice were food for the weary but nourishment for the strong. The greens, bitter on their own, mellowed into flavor when boiled down with a little fat or bone. The rice soaked up everything, turning the dish into something both filling and healing. It was simple, yes, but it carried the essence of home, steam, spice, and the rhythm of spoons against bowls. Sometimes families added bits of salt pork or even a splash of vinegar to wake up the taste. Most times, though, it was just greens and rice, humble and whole. It fed everyone, from the field hand to the school child, giving strength for another day. In kitchens lit by single bulbs and hope, this meal was not just eaten, it was shared, savored, and remembered. The steam rose from the pot like a prayer, curling in the air as laughter filled the room. It was a dish that brought silence to hunger and calm to the hardest of hearts. Turnip greens and rice were proof that nourishment did not need luxury, just patience, warmth, and a steady hand to stir the pot. Elk meat was a prize, and the shoulder was the biggest piece you could get your hands on if you were lucky enough to bring one down. Smoky, thick, and hard to cook, it took patience and skill to turn that shoulder into dinner. Hunters in the wild preserved the meat by hanging it over juniper or hickory smoke until it was dark and dry on the outside. Then it was roasted slowly, either over a flame or buried deep in coals. The glaze was made from tallow, that golden fat rendered down from the same elk, brushed on top every hour to keep the meat moist and glistening. The smell alone was worth the wait. Rich, wild, and earthy, it filled every inch of the cabin or campsite. When it was ready, you carved off thick slices and passed them around by hand. No one talked, they just chewed. You served it with root vegetables if you had them, or dunked it in hot broth made from the bones. This was the kind of meal you told stories about later. It was hard-earned, and that made it taste better than anything you could buy, then or now. Beans, collard green, and cornmeal bake was the best kind of fusion, two Southern staples baked into one soulful dish. The collards, cooked down with onion and seasoning, were folded into cornmeal batter rich with eggs and milk. When it came out of the oven, the top was crisp, golden, and fragrant, the inside soft and savory. It was the flavor of comfort layered with ingenuity. The greens added depth, the cornmeal brought warmth, and together they made something entirely new. Families served it beside stews or on its own, each bite tasting like home and heritage combined. It was a dish that stretched across generations, tying together the old ways and the new table. Collard green and cornmeal bake was proof that tradition did not stand still. It evolved, always with love. The scent alone felt like memory reborn, a blend of hearth and heritage. It was Southern creativity at its finest, built on wisdom that refused to waste or forget. In every golden slice lived the heartbeat of family and the story of perseverance. It fed more than hunger. It fed pride, reminding everyone that humble ingredients could rise to greatness. It was the kind of food that tasted like resilience itself, baked into every crumb. Vegetable pot pie with biscuit crust was one of the cleverest ways to turn leftovers into a comforting meal. My grandmother gathered whatever vegetables were left from the week, beans, carrots, peas, or turnips, and simmered them in a simple gravy. She poured the mixture into a dish and covered it with biscuit dough instead of pie crust, which baked into a golden, fluffy topping. The result was hearty, filling, and deeply satisfying, stretching scraps into something that felt like a Sunday supper. Each slice carried both thrift and comfort, a reminder that nothing from the kitchen was wasted. The biscuit crust gave the dish substance, making it a true dinner instead of just a side. In the 1960s, vegetable pot pie with biscuit crust was common across homes that relied on ingenuity, turning odds and ends into meals that filled plates and warmed hearts. It was survival, wrapped in comfort, food that told the story of resourceful families making the most of what they had.
Number 16, liver and gravy over rice. A pound of beef liver on the butcher's paper in 1945 New Orleans. Deep purple, dressed in flour, she sliced it thin, dredged each piece, seared it in bacon drippings 2 minutes aside. The outside browned, the inside stayed pink. The liver came out, 3 sliced onions went in, sweated soft, caramel color. The kitchen smelled sweet enough to bring the children in from the yard. She made the gravy in the same pan with the fawn, a tablespoon of flour, and a cup of water from the rice pot. The whole supper went over a plate of long, grain Carolina rice. It cost 12 cents and fed 4. Your grandmother served it once a week the way her mother had during the Depression. Liver was a Wednesday staple in every working kitchen. By 1973, liver had become a punishment children whispered about on the school bus. The dish vanished. Number 21, salt pork and gravy. Salt pork was the cheapest cut at the butcher counter. A slab of cured pork belly, mostly fat with a thin ribbon of meat running through. You sliced it thin and fried it in a skillet until the fat rendered and the edges turned crispy. Then you pulled the meat out, sprinkled flour into the drippings, stirred until golden, and poured in milk to make a thick white gravy. That gravy went over rice, over biscuits, over whatever was on the plate. The salt pork itself was almost a garnish. The gravy was the real meal. In 1954, salt pork cost 29 cents a pound. A pound made gravy for a week. Black families in the rural South ate salt pork gravy the way other Americans ate butter. It went on everything. It stretched everything. It turned a plate of plain rice into supper. The taste was salt and smoke and richness. Not meat, not really, but it disguised how little actual meat was involved. Number 22, deviled eggs with paprika. Every black woman at Easter had her deviled egg plate. Not just any plate, a special carrier with little indentations for each egg half. She carried it to church like a crown, because on Easter Sunday, your eggs were judged. The differences were subtle but deadly serious. Ratio of mustard to mayonnaise, sweet pickle relish, or dill, how much paprika went on top. The first known deviled egg recipe appeared in 1877 in the Montgomery Advertiser in Alabama. By the mid-20th century, a dozen eggs cost about 60 cents. Those vintage egg plates from the 1950s and 1960s now sell for $25 to $75 on collector markets. The dish had a practical origin too. After weeks of Lent, your family had accumulated hard-boiled Easter eggs that needed eating. But the real reason deviled eggs mattered was simpler than that. They were one of the few pieces of fancy serving ware that working class Black women owned. Presentation was everything. Adrian Miller, the James Beard Award-winning soul food historian, has called deviled eggs one of the clearest shared traditions across the Southern racial divide, a rare point of commonality. That small truth mattered.
Neck bone gravy over rice became the foundation when turkey was beyond reach, transforming the cheapest cuts into liquid gold that satisfied entire families. Black mothers would simmer pork or beef neck bones for hours with onions, garlic, and bay leaves until the meat felt tender and the broth turned rich. The bones cost pennies per pound at butcher shops, yet held marrow that created gravy with body and soul. Women knew that patience turned scarcity into abundance, letting those bones bubble on back burners from morning until afternoon. The finished gravy was thick, savory, and packed with protein from the shredded meat. Poured generously over white rice, this combination stretched to feed 20 people when turkey could barely serve 8. Children sopped up every drop with cornbread, while adults appreciated how resourcefulness created satisfaction without shame. Neckbone gravy wasn't poverty food, but proof that love and skill mattered more than money.
Number 6, oxtails. This was the dish that once held an entire Sunday together, simmering on the stove from morning service straight through to the evening meal. The tail of the cow was about as cheap as beef ever got, a bony, gristly cut that the better kitchens passed over without a second look. Black Southern cooks knew that very toughness was the secret. They browned the cut sections hard in a heavy pot, then covered them in water or a little broth with onion, garlic, and a bay leaf, and let the whole thing braise low for 3 or 4 hours. Hour by hour, the connective tissue melted into the liquid, thickening it into a deep, glossy gravy, while the meat grew so tender it pulled away from the bone with a fork. The longer it cooked, the richer it got, which made it the perfect pot to leave going while the family was at church. Spooned over rice with the gravy poured thick on top, it turned the cheapest beef in the store into the centerpiece of the Sunday table. Hearty, deeply savory, and worth waiting all day for. Number 17, short ribs in brown gravy. The short rib was a working class cut, bone in, fatty, and tough until you gave it time. Short ribs were dredged in seasoned flour, browned in a hot skillet, then transferred to a deep pot with onions, garlic, and just enough water to make a gravy. The lid went on and the heat stayed low for 3 hours. By the time they came off the stove, the meat had pulled away from the bone and the gravy had turned thick and dark. This was not barbecue. This was stovetop, braising with no recipe and no timer. The cook checked by feel, and when the bone wiggled loose, dinner was ready. Served over white rice or egg noodles with the gravy poured heavy. This meal survived on its simplicity. That same simplicity is what made it easy to forget once the faster options arrived. Number 9, neck bone and macaroni. Not baked macaroni and cheese. This was simpler. Elbow macaroni boiled until it was just past tender, then stirred directly into the pot with the neck bones and broth. The noodles swelled up and absorbed the liquid the same way rice did, but the texture was different, chewier, and more substantial. Some families added a handful of whatever cheese was in the refrigerator, but plenty made it without. The broth itself gave the noodles enough flavor. This was a meal that appeared in households where there were many mouths to feed, because a box of macaroni cost very little and turned one pot of neck bones into enough food for 8 or 9 people. You could not do that with rice alone. The noodles stretched the math in a way that no other ingredient could match at that price.
Fish sticks and crinkle-cut fries were the kind of dinner kids begged for, the unofficial meal of busy weeknights when the adults were too tired to fuss. The moment that frozen box hit the counter, excitement followed, because everyone knew dinner would be fast and crispy, and exactly the kind of food children believed counted as a celebration. The fish sticks went into the oven in neat rows, sizzling as the breading crisped while the fries baked beside them, each crinkle catching just enough salt to make them addictive. It was not fancy seafood, not even close, but to a child it tasted like the best thing the freezer aisle had ever made. There was comfort in the uniformity, the predictability, the way dipping sauces always turned the plate into a tiny adventure. Adults liked it because it filled everyone up without much effort. Kids loved it because it tasted like freedom and fun. Even now, biting into a fish stick can take you straight back to a living room floor covered in toys, a television playing too loudly, and a plate balanced on your knees. It was cheap, easy, and unforgettable. Potato and onion gravy over cornbread was one of those suppers that stretched simple ingredients into something far more satisfying than it looked. Families who did not have access to meat would fry onions in leftover drippings, add water and flour, and stir it into a thick brown gravy. That gravy, poured over wedges of cornbread, turned into a filling plate that could quiet hunger at the end of a long day. The onions gave sweetness, the drippings added depth, and the cornbread soaked it all up like a sponge. In African American households across the South, this became a dependable way to feed large families on very little. Cornmeal was cheap, onions were plentiful, and gravy turned scraps into a real meal. Children might not have known they were eating out of necessity because it tasted comforting and rich. This dish has faded as quick meals replaced slow stove cooking, but for many who grew up with it, the memory of potato and onion gravy over cornbread still means home and survival. Boiled cabbage and salted fish was a meal that spoke of coastlines and hard work. Salted fish, preserved to last through rationing, was soaked and boiled until tender, its salt mellowed, but its flavor strong. The cabbage cooked alongside, soaking up the richness of the fish while releasing its own sweetness. The smell was unmistakable, the kind that lingered long after the plates were cleared. Some served it with rice or cornbread to stretch it further. It was humble, yes, but satisfying. A reminder of how deeply the sea and land fed one another. Even far from the coast, families held on to this dish, a piece of history served steaming in a single pot. It carried the spirit of fishermen, mothers, and laborers who worked with what the earth and ocean allowed. The salt clung to the air like a memory of the sea, even for those who had never seen it. This was food that told stories, of storms survived, of nets mended, of tables where gratitude was the main course. Every bite carried the taste of resilience, a flavor that outlasted hardship and traveled through generations untouched. Pemmican was survival food at its most basic: dried meat, fat, and berries mashed into cakes that could last for months without spoiling. But out on the frontier, folks found ways to turn it into something hot and hearty when supplies ran low. Enter the pemmican hot dish, which was exactly what it sounded like. Pemmican fried up in a skillet with whatever else was on hand: onions, turnips, wild greens, or even a spoonful of leftover beans. The meat, usually deer or buffalo, had been dried until leathery and ground into pieces. The fat came from tallow, rendered down in iron pots until it was clear and clean. It all came together in one sizzling, heavy pan. It did not smell great, but it tasted like energy, and it gave you the strength to do whatever was needed the next day. You could eat it with a biscuit or flatbread if you had any left, but often you just scooped it straight from the pan with your knife. This was the kind of food you made when there was no room for complaints. You ate it quietly, with the fire spitting and the wind outside your cabin walls. It filled the space where comfort used to live. Chicken and rice casserole with cream of mushroom was the kind of modern miracle that found its way into kitchens by the 1960s. Canned soup met tradition, and somehow it worked. The chicken baked until tender, the rice soaking up every drop of that creamy sauce until the two became one. It was convenience food made with soul, comforting in its own right. For working mothers, it meant dinner without exhaustion, flavor without waste. It filled bellies and hearts alike, the scent of garlic and mushroom drifting down hallways. Though born of new times, it still carried the spirit of the old, resourceful, hearty, and made to be shared. Chicken and rice casserole became Sunday supper for a new generation, the next chapter of comfort written in cans and casseroles. It was a bridge between eras, proof that love adapts but never disappears. Every forkful was steady, familiar, and full of reassurance, the quiet song of modern Southern kitchens learning how to balance care and change. Chicken wing stew was one of those meals that would surprise modern ears, since wings were once the cheapest part of the bird. My grandmother bought them in bulk when she could, piling them into pots with onions, celery, and carrots. Slowly simmered, the wings gave up their fat and flavor, turning thin broth into rich gravy. She thickened it with flour or cornstarch, serving it hot over rice or bread to stretch it even further. It was messy eating, but no one complained because the taste was so comforting. Wings may be prized today, but in the 1960s they were scraps, turned into nourishment by clever hands. She said every part of the bird had value if you treated it with respect. Chicken wing stew carried the spirit of thrift, transforming what others dismissed into something that filled the house with warmth. It was proof that good cooking did not depend on wealth, only patience and care.
Number 12, sweet potato hush puppies. A bowl of grated sweet potato on the kitchen counter in 1944 Savannah, mixed with a cup of yellow cornmeal, a half cup of flour, an egg, a teaspoon of baking powder, enough buttermilk to bind it loose. The cook dropped the batter by a tablespoon into a skillet of hot lard. The hush puppies rolled themselves over as they fried. They came out the size of a walnut, golden brown on the outside, soft and orange in the middle, sweet without sugar. The potato did all the work. She served them with stewed catfish from the river and a wedge of lemon picked from the tree behind the house. The dish fed 5 for 11 cents. Your grandmother grew the sweet potatoes herself in a small lot behind the kitchen. The root cellar under your porch held them through winter. It was the backup pantry of every coastal Georgia household. By 1976, the deep fryer at the corner restaurant had taken over and you stopped pulling out the skillet at home. Number 11, smothered cabbage. One head of cabbage. Here's what that became. A piece of smoked meat, salt, pepper, a little vinegar. You quartered the cabbage, layered it in a pot with the smoked meat, added a cup of water, covered it, and let it cook low and slow until the cabbage turned silky and sweet and the smoke from the meat perfumed the whole pot. A head of cabbage cost 10 cents in the 1950s and fed a family of 4. The smoked meat was whatever you had. A ham hock, a piece of smoke's neck, a strip of fat back. The cabbage did the rest. It shrank down to almost nothing in volume, but concentrated every flavor in the pot. In the kitchens of Birmingham and Memphis and Jackson, smothered cabbage appeared at least once a week. It was the supper that said, "We are between paydays and the garden is done, but we are still going to eat." Number 10, fried fatback with grits. Number 25, corn pudding. Plain cornbread spent all year feeding the family. But on Easter Sunday, that same cornmeal got dressed up. 6 ears of fresh corn scraped into a bowl with eggs, whole milk, and real butter, baked until the top turned golden and the inside set into a custard so soft you needed a spoon to serve it. This was the dish that said humble ingredients could be sacred if you treated them right. Enslaved people had survived on cornmeal rations all year long, 1 peck per week. That was the standard. So when Easter came and a free black woman turned that same grain into something worthy of the risen Lord's Day, she was rewriting what cornmeal meant. By the 1970s, corn pudding was a standard Easter side across the South. Today, over 80% of corn pudding recipes use canned corn and Jiffy mix. The custard version, the one that required patience and fresh eggs and a kitchen that smelled like spring, has nearly vanished. Your grandmother did not need a recipe. She needed a cast iron dish and 45 minutes.
Biscuits made fresh on Thanksgiving morning became the warm, buttery bread that mopped up gravy and made every bite more satisfying, prepared from basic ingredients that most kitchens already had. Black mothers mixed flour, baking powder, salt, and lard into simple dough that baked into flaky, tender biscuits, golden on top and soft inside. The key was handling the dough gently and not overworking it, lessons passed down from grandmothers who'd perfected biscuit making through decades of practice. A single batch using 5 pounds of flour produced enough biscuits to feed 20 people with leftovers for turkey sandwiches the next day. Some women brushed the tops with melted margarine for extra richness, while others kept them plain to let the flaky layers speak for themselves. Children would sneak biscuits while they cooled, unable to resist that combination of buttery exterior and steamy interior.
Number 13, smothered turkey wings. A pound of fresh turkey wings cost 19 cents at the meat counter in 1957. Most white shoppers passed the wings by because they didn't know what to do with them. Your grandmother knew exactly what to do. She washed the wings in cold water, dredged them in flour, seasoned with salt, black pepper, garlic powder, and a pinch of poultry seasoning, and browned them in a skillet of bacon grease until the skin was crisp like paper. Then the wings went into a deep pot with 2 yellow onions, 3 stalks of celery, and 4 cups of water. The lid went on. The pot simmered on the back burner for 2.5 hours. By supper time, the meat was falling off the bone and the broth had turned into a thick mahogany gravy. She served the wings over rice with the gravy ladled across both. 6 children licked their fingers clean. You'd watch the wing bones get picked over twice. Number 23, oxtail stew over rice. Oxtail sections were dusted with seasoned flour and browned in batches in a cast iron Dutch oven until every surface had a dark crust. Onions, garlic, thyme, and a splash of tomato paste went in next, then enough water to barely cover the bones. The lid went on and the pot moved to a low oven or the back of the stove for 4 hours. By the time the lid came off, the collagen had dissolved into the liquid, turning the broth into something that coated the spoon like varnish. The meat clung to the knobbed vertebrae in small, intensely flavored pockets that had to be worked loose with teeth and fingers. Oxtail was a Sunday staple in black households from Jamaica to Georgia, carried across the water and adapted to whatever stove was available. The dish required nothing expensive, just time and a willingness to cook something that looked unpromising into something extraordinary. When butcher counters shrank and oxtail jumped in price from pennies a pound to one of the most expensive cuts in the case, the Sunday pot became a luxury that priced out the families who invented it. Number 13, neck bone and sweet potato pot. Sweet potatoes grow easily in southern soil, and many families kept a patch of them in the yard well into the 1970s. Cut into thick rounds and added to a pot of simmering neck bones, they softened and absorbed the savory broth while holding on to their own sweetness. The combination sounds strange if you have not tasted it, but the salt and smoke from the bones against the sweetness of the potato created something the tongue recognized as complete. You did not need dessert after this meal. The sweetness was already there, built into the dinner itself. Families served this in deep bowls in the fall and winter, when the sweet potatoes came out of the ground and the cold made the body ask for something heavy. A single pot produced enough for 2 suppers, and the sweet potatoes held up better as leftovers than rice or bread did.
Fried bologna steaks were the kind of dinner that proved you did not need expensive meat to feel like you were eating something special. Thick-cut slices of bologna hit the pan with a sizzle, curling at the edges as the heat transformed them from simple lunch meat into something smoky, savory, and downright irresistible. Families would score the edges so they stayed flat, pressing them down like a short-order cook working the grill at a busy diner. Once browned and sizzling, those slices went onto a plate beside potatoes or toast, turning an ordinary night into something that tasted hearty and satisfying. The smell drifted through the whole house, warm and salty and impossible to ignore. Kids loved watching the slices puff up. Adults loved how far a single pack could stretch, and everyone loved how it tasted a lot fancier than it actually was. It was thrift done right, the kind that created a meal so memorable you still think about it decades later. No matter how simple the ingredients were, fried bologna steaks felt like real food, the kind of meal that told you everything was going to be okay. Cornmeal dumplings in pot liquor were a staple of Southern African American kitchens, where nothing went to waste. After collard greens or turnip greens were boiled, the leftover broth, rich with nutrients and pork flavor, was called pot liquor. Cornmeal dumplings, simple mixtures of cornmeal and water, were dropped into that broth and simmered until tender. The result was a starch-heavy, comforting dish that cost pennies but filled stomachs. Families valued it because it made the most of what was already cooking, turning leftovers into a whole new meal. For children, dumplings in pot liquor were warm and familiar, often tied to memories of sitting around the table with family. The dish reflected both resourcefulness and tradition, showing how African American households transformed scraps into suppers that carried meaning. Though rare today, cornmeal dumplings in pot liquor stand as one of the most powerful examples of thrift meeting comfort. They were practical, soulful, and unforgettable for those who grew up eating them. Hoover stew was the meal that kept families fed when the pantry looked bare and the paychecks had stopped. It was a pot of survival, bubbling with whatever a family could gather, usually macaroni, canned tomatoes, and slices of hot dog that stretched further than anyone thought possible. Every house had its own version, passed along like a secret recipe of endurance. Sometimes it was soupy, sometimes thick enough to stand a spoon in, but always hearty. Mothers would stir the pot with tired hands, humming gospel songs as the smell of tomato and salt filled the room. The macaroni swelled, the hot dogs bobbed like little treasures, and children waited with bowls clutched tight. It was the taste of making do, of not giving up when cupboards were empty and spirits low. Hoover stew was more than a meal. It was proof that a little imagination could turn struggle into supper, and that warmth came as much from hope as it did from heat. This was not an everyday dinner. Buffalo meat was a rare and sacred thing, hunted with care and shared with reverence. When settlers got their hands on some, they treated it like a holiday. The roast was slow-cooked over fire or buried in a pit with hot stones, and the juices were thickened into a gravy, using wild juniper berries crushed with a rock or spoon. The result was smoky, slightly bitter, and rich beyond measure. Juniper gave it that wild taste. Something sharp, something old. This dish came from a time when nothing was farmed and everything was earned. It fed big families, whole camps, or traveling parties headed west. Nobody wasted a bite, and nobody ever forgot the taste. Catfish court bouillon was Sunday food, Creole at heart, full of fire and family. Thick fillets of catfish simmered in a tomato gravy rich with onion, garlic, and bell pepper until the sauce turned the color of sunset. It was ladled over rice, steaming and fragrant, with spice that woke the tongue but soothed the soul. Families gathered around kitchen tables, passing bread to dip into the sauce until not a drop remained. It was the kind of dish that reminded everyone of where flavor began, with sweat, soil, and skill. Court bouillon was more than a recipe. It was a gathering, a celebration of what could be created from river and hand. The sound of the pot bubbling matched the laughter in the room, the rhythm of spoons against bowls steady as a hymn. It was food that belonged to both past and present, proof that the simplest ingredients could still taste like a feast. Giblet gravy over rice was one of those dinners that showed how nothing went to waste in the kitchen. Chicken was expensive, but the innards, the gizzard, liver, and heart, were cheap or sometimes even given away by butchers. My grandmother chopped them small, simmered them in broth, and thickened the pot into a rich gravy that smelled like Sunday supper. Poured over rice, it became hearty enough to stretch across the whole family. The rice soaked up the flavor, turning a small handful of giblets into a meal that fed 6 mouths without complaint. Some children turned up their noses at first, but hunger taught quick appreciation, and the taste of the gravy was strong, savory, and full of life. She said, "Giblet gravy was proof that dignity came not from the cut of meat, but from the hands that prepared it." In the 1960s, this dish carried people through lean nights, filling bowls with warmth when little else could be afforded. Giblet gravy over rice was frugality turned into something satisfying. Prairie chicken was not chicken at all. It was wild grouse or quail, lean and gamey, and harder to catch than it was to cook. These birds were everywhere across the plains in the early days, and they fed whole families with just one shot and a lucky morning. The dressing, what we would now call stuffing, was made with old bread, sage, and whatever herbs you could find or grow in the yard. When it was baked in a cast-iron Dutch oven, the whole cabin would fill with the kind of scent that stopped everyone in their tracks. This meal showed up on tables for Sunday dinner or after a good hunting day. It reminded folks of home, even if that home was just 4 walls and a dirt floor.
The pages are brittle now, and some of the handwriting is barely legible, but the women who wrote them down did not call themselves authors. They called it Tuesday. Pick one from this list, anyone. Make it this week and find out what your kitchen has been missing. Drop the name of the dish your family kept in a notebook, the one nobody outside your household ever tasted.